Chapter 367, Settling Down with a Guarantor. Wang Chengqing bitterly smiled in response. Immortal master jests. Although there are few immortals with storage pouches, they are incomparably precious. How could they lend them to us mortals and ferry our common items? Furthermore, every transaction between the large islands consists of great quantities. An immortal's storage pouch may be wondrous without comparison, but it can only hold so much. Even more so, immortals wouldn't do something so beneath their dignity as freighting goods. Wang Chengqing gave Han Li a careful explanation. Han Li nodded his head without speaking and sunk into contemplation with narrowed eyes. After a long while, Han Li indifferently said, "Master Gu wishes for me to act on his behalf, but I am powerless to do so. Because my cultivation isn't high, me agreeing would only shame him. I request that Mr. Wang report to Master Gu that he should find someone better qualified. As for the service of bringing me to Stalwart Star Island on his boat, I am able to offer a few spirit stones in remuneration." Han Li spoke slowly and clearly, but his voice was cold and detached. When the old man heard Han Li's rejection, his face paled slightly. He then pitifully pleaded, "Great Immortal, please assist my clan's master. In order to pursue this business, Master Gu already paid a great price to the ship's staff. Master Gu has also paid a great sum of spirit stones for the right to participate in the challenge. If he does not acquire the qualifications to trade between the great islands, the Gu clan will surely go bankrupt. Us laborers will also lose our jobs and will have to find different opportunities. My cultivation is truly inferior. Also, I do not wish to provoke any quarrels upon arriving at Stalwart Star Island." Han Li expressionlessly shook his head in blunt refusal. Seeing that Han Li's refusal was certain and that his tone was strict, Wang Chengqing didn't dare to continue his pleading. He could only resolve his spirit and chat about the local customs with Han Li, telling him urgently needed knowledge. An hour later, Han Li noticed that the old man's mind was wandering. He sent him away to rest, telling him to come back when his mind was clearer. Wang Chengqing had felt tired for quite some time. Seeing that Han Li had shown him consideration, he didn't decline and followed his suggestion. After the old man left and respectfully closed the door, Han Li couldn't help but sigh. Although he had some wealth on hand and even held some spiritual medicines that benefited mortals, he didn't have the slightest intention of giving any to the old man. He couldn't possibly reveal his wealth in this unfamiliar land. Otherwise, he might provoke unnecessary trouble. Even fatal disaster wasn't an unlikely possibility. With that in mind, Han Li sat down cross-legged on the bed. He then swallowed a yellow dragon pill and began refining his qi. He must restore his cultivation as soon as possible. After all, strength truly speaks loudest, regardless of what land one resided in. After meditating for only a short moment, he heard faint footsteps from outside his room. Although Han Li didn't open the door, he had released his spiritual sense outside earlier and could see everything that occurred. The old man called Wang Chengqing had returned with Master Gu closely following behind him with an appearance of great worry. Han Li wrinkled his brow. It seemed trouble had come for him. It was obvious that this Master Gu hadn't given up yet and came to bother him. Were this the heavenly south region, Han Li could stop them in their tracks with an ice-cold shout, and they wouldn't dare to enter. But he was a new arrival in an unfamiliar land. He mustn't appear too unreasonable. Without waiting for the two to knock on the door, he said with a mild tone, "Please come in. The door isn't locked." Master Gu and Wang Chengqing were shocked, but then they immediately realized that this great immortal had invited them in. They hastily tidied up their clothes before respectfully entering the room. At this moment, Han Li had already gotten off the bed and was now standing with his hands behind his back. "Great Immortal, Master Gu wishes to personally discuss this matter with you. Could Great Immortal please give Master Gu an opportunity?" Wang Chengqing had previous contact with Han Li and knew that this immortal wasn't someone to be deceived. Thus, he directly stated his business for coming. Han Li first glanced at the old man. Then he smiled and said indifferently, "Of course he can, but you should first advise Master Gu to not set his hopes too high." Wang Chengqing revealed slight embarrassment, but he gave an honest explanation to the middle-aged man regardless. The middle-aged man's face blanked upon hearing this, but immediately after, the middle-aged man said something that first startled Wang Chengqing before causing him to reveal a queer expression. Han Li watched detachedly from the side and remained expressionless. "Great Immortal, our Master Gu says that so long as you lend your assistance, the Gu clan will bestow a large sum of spirit stones to you, regardless of whether this matter results in victory or defeat. If you truly manage to win the rights for the Gu clan to perform trade between the Great Islands, Master Gu is willing to even become your guarantor, allowing a foreign cultivator such as yourself to become an official resident of Stalwart Star Island. Most of all, the Gu clan is willing to respectfully offer 3/10 of the 3-year trading profits to you, even if you do not wish to take up an official position at Stalwart Star Island. Once Wang Chengqing said this, his gaze became dim as if he found Master Gu's offer to be incredulous. Han Li was somewhat surprised and stroked his chin. Baffled, he asked, "What? In order to live at Stalwart Star Island, one needs a guarantor. I never heard you say this." Although Han Li's words were mild, Wang Chengqing broke out in a cold sweat and hastily explained, "Immortal Master misunderstands. Foreign immortals at Stalwart Star Island can be divided into 2 types. One type is there for a temporary stay. They are unable to hold office and generally live there for a few years, leaving or staying depending on their own preference. The other type have guarantors from the great nearby clans and are able to stay as long as they wish. Not only do they have to pay less spirit stones to stay on the island and have the ability to follow the formalities to obtain a permanent residence, but they also have the qualifications to hold office and have the right to participate in the decennial Great Spirit Land Contest. Depending on one's performance in the contest, they are given land with a corresponding density of spiritual qi. This old man neglected to mention this to you because finding a guarantor for a foreign cultivator on an island as large as Stalwart Star Island is an exceedingly complicated matter." Fearing that Han Li would misunderstand, Wang Chengqing explained this all in a single breath. Han Li's expression became gloomy afterwards. Han Li doubtfully asked, "What happens to those cultivators who aren't able to find a residence on Stalwart Star Island? Are they unable to acquire a place to cultivate?" The old man replied, "Of course not. Those immortals from subsidiary islands are able to participate in the competitions. However, they can only participate in the main island's contest in order to obtain places of cultivation. As for why Stalwart Star Island is the main island, that is because the island has the best spirit veins and densest spiritual qi in the local sea. The other islands possess greatly inferior spirit veins in comparison." With all this information, Han Li's expression incessantly switched between clear and gloomy. These rules were an obvious tactic for the cultivators of the main island to ensure they held higher cultivation. All cultivators wanted a cultivation area that held great spiritual qi. Regardless of whether they were nurturing spiritual herbs or cultivating, it was always better to have a place with denser spiritual qi. Han Li tightly tensed his brow and paced back and forth with a lowered head. He then raised his head and turned to look at the middle-aged man surnamed Gu, who held an expectant expression. Seeing that Master Gu held such a hopeful expression, Han Li sighed and slowly said, "Please inform me about the cultivation levels of the other cultivators that will be fighting. If I can handle them, I will make an exception and fight on your behalf." Han Li revealed a helpless appearance. Wang Chengqing became overjoyed and hastily gave the middle-aged man a translation, causing him to become rapt with joy. Afterwards, Han Li inwardly mused, "If those cultivators aren't foundation establishment, by relying on my puppets and incisive magic tools, I should be able to win without a problem, even with my current meager cultivation. As such, I should still be able to cultivate the 3 essence revolutions technique. Naturally, I'll also want to cultivate that external reincarnation technique and great development technique. They should prove to be effective life-saving measures." 4 days later, a large cheer echoed throughout the huge ship. They had finally reached Stalwart Star Island. Han Li followed the lead of Master Gu and Wang Chengqing as they excitedly handled the formalities on the island for Han Li. After all, an unfamiliar cultivator to the island must be reported at the docks in order to avoid being mistaken for a malicious intruder. As Han Li followed after the two, he silently sized up the entire port. He was left with the impression that it was truly grand. Regardless of the quantity or size of the ships, it was fundamentally incomparable to any of the small ports from the heavenly south region. Unexpectedly, there were 7 other remarkably huge ships similar to Master Gu's ship already moored at the port. Smaller ships naturally numbered many times more. Although Han Li didn't count carefully, he estimated that about 300 ships were docked at the harbor. As for the crowd of people bustling about the harbor and ships, it was far more than that. This was the first time that Han Li saw what he thought to be an ocean of people. Chapter 368, Farmstead. But as Han Li was counting the number of mortals, he also felt the faint aura of several cultivators. It seemed these cultivators were in charge of maintaining order at the port. As Han Li was thinking this, he and Crooked Soul were brought to a stone room inside the harbor. The room was very simply decorated with only a wooden desk and a chair with a wrinkly old man sitting in it with his eyes shut. Upon hearing Han Li and company enter, this immortal opened his eyes. A cold light suddenly shot out as his eyes opened. Han Li's heart shuddered upon seeing it. This person was unexpectedly a Foundation establishment cultivator. In addition, his magic power was no less than Han Li when he had been at his peak. This wrinkly, yellow-faced old man ignored Master Gu and Wang Chanking and directly swept his gaze toward Han Li and Crooked Soul. After seeing that Han Li was only a chi condensation cultivator, his expression became lazy once more. But after he took note of Han Li, he seemed to have glanced at Crooked Soul several more times. "If you have business, be quick about it. Otherwise, don't interrupt my rest." He spoke dispiritedly and displayed some impatience. By relying on his highly retentive memory, Han Li had acquired a rough understanding of the local language from Wang Chanking. Although he couldn't speak it, he could understand the meaning of others with some difficulty. But since he didn't have any experience interacting with the cultivators of this land, he didn't say a word and only smiled as Master Gu and Wang Chanking spoke with the cultivator. Master Gu respectfully addressed him as Immortal Yang. Then he moved closer to him and whispered something before turning around and pointing at Han Li. It seemed he was explaining his origins. Afterwards, he placed a few spirit stones in his hand. Grasping the spirit stones in his hand, Immortal Yang's expression greatly eased up. He then took out a green jade medallion and stiffly asked Han Li, "Your name?" Han Li? Han Li was able to say his own name fluently. As for how the other party would write them, he didn't care in the least. Immortal Yang's hand flashed with green light, enveloping the entire jade medallion. After a short moment, the radiance faded away, revealing two strange symbols that Han Li hadn't seen before. The yellow-faced old man then tossed the jade medallion towards Han Li. "Properly put away the medallion. If you lose it, you must immediately come back here and receive a replacement. Otherwise, you will face punishment as a trespasser on Stalwart Star Island. Naturally, if you settle down here later, you will no longer require the jade medallion and can return it. As for that refined corpse behind you, it obviously doesn't need one." After saying this with a raspy voice, he no longer paid them any attention and closed his eyes once more. Master Gu tactfully left at once. However, Han Li seemed interested in how he saw the Crooked Soul's true identity with a single glance. After taking a good look at him, Han Li silently left the room. Shortly after Han Li left, that Immortal Yang opened his eyes once more. He muttered to himself with slight bewilderment, "That refined corpse is truly odd. It is clearly a dead body, but it still releases spiritual chi. Could it be some sort of new corpse refinement technique?" The old man then sunk into a long period of contemplation. After leaving the port, Master Gu hired a carriage being pulled by strange ox-like goats, quickly bringing them deeper into the island by traveling along a large road. Along the way, there were countless similar vehicles going about their own business. But once the carriage passed through several small, bustling towns, they saw far fewer carriages. As they traveled along a few small roads, pedestrians and carriages became exceedingly sparse. After hurriedly traveling for half a day, the carriage finally arrived at a farmstead that occupied over 2 acres. The farmstead grew many odd crops that Han Li hadn't seen before. There were crops that resembled grains and rice. However, their leaves were thick, flat, and of a violet red color. There were also crops that resembled cabbage. They released a faint scent, and although it possessed an extremely similar appearance to cabbage, there were no such cabbages that were as tall as half a man in the heavenly south region. There was even choice some that bloomed small blue flowers. More than 10 farmers could be seen at each vegetable field. They were toiling at the fields in groups of 2 and 3. This provided quite a serene view of the farmstead. As Han Li gazed at the farm with interest, the carriage had arrived at the large entrance of the farmstead's manor and stopped. Han Li brought Crooked Soul out with him and took a look around. The manor was surrounded by green pine trees and neighbored a rather large hill. It appeared somewhat unusual, but could be considered to be quite tasteful with a serene environment. In addition, the manor was surrounded by earth walls 6 meters tall and 1 meter thick. Many houses lied within the walls, appearing to have been built recently. "So this is the Gu clan." Han Li silently uttered a word of praise, but as he carefully examined the pines, his expression inadvertently changed because of an astonishing discovery. The trees that surrounded the manor faintly revealed the aura of a formation spell. It was obvious that a restriction had been placed here. Although Han Li didn't view the formation spell to be exceptional by any means, it was still enough to trap a low-level cultivator. While Han Li was feeling somewhat suspicious, Master Gu got off the carriage and spoke with an apologetic smile. "Immortal Han, please take a rest at the manor. I'll call for some subordinates to prepare some of the island's specialty wine for the Immortal Master." Han Li took a random glance at the surroundings of the manor and replied with a smile, "Let it be. I don't wish to disturb Master Gu's home. It'll be fine if I reside there for the time being. After our affairs have been handled, I will search for a more permanent residence." Han Li then pointed in a direction off to the side. Master Gu and Wang Changqing followed the direction Han Li was pointing to and saw that it was a small, solitary hill. They couldn't help but be dumbstruck. But after seeing that their many enthusiastic invitations had failed, they could only allow this strange immortal to head towards the small hill. They gave each other a mutual glance of helplessness before walking into the manor. Han Li brought Crooked Soul with him on the small, sloped path towards the hilltop. He then took a glance down at the Gu clan manor from above. He saw that Master Gu was heading towards the huge residence at the center of the manor while being escorted by a crowd of women and men. By the time he had arrived there, most of them have dispersed. Only a few beautifully clothed individuals followed him into the manor. Han Li smirked slightly and turned around, busying himself with his own affairs. He first went to find a relatively flat and even piece of land at the back of the hill. Then he quickly uprooted several of the thicker pines and cut them into pieces with magic tools. Afterwards, he had Crooked Soul. An hour later, he had completed a simple small wooden house on the hill. The house had a wooden table, wooden chairs, and even a wooden bed. In the following month, Han Li stayed in his house every day, taking medicinal pills and refining qi, striving to restore his cultivation as soon as possible. As for Master Gu and Wang Changqing, they visited several times during this period and discussed matters pertaining to the contest. Afterwards, they hurriedly left, not daring to further disturb Han Li's cultivation. But as Master Gu was a sensible person, he sent delicacies up to Han Li's home every few days for his enjoyment. Han Li gladly accepted them without a trace of politeness. Many kinds of exceptionally sweet fruits were among these offerings, much to Han Li's enjoyment. They were clearly the island's local specialties since he had never seen them before. During the last few days of the month, Han Li had managed to restore his cultivation to the 5th layer of qi condensation. He found this very surprising and felt his heart become more assured. According to Master Gu, none of the cultivators that the 10 clans had requested possessed a high level of cultivation. Apart from a few exceptions, a majority of them only possessed a cultivation at the 6th or 7th layer of qi condensation. As for the lots which would decide the fights, so long as Han Li's luck wasn't exceptionally terrible, he wouldn't have a problem in the contest. In addition, Master Gu had scoured the nearby seas for 3 impressive magic tools to increase Han Li's odds of success. Han Li barely classified these items as high-grade magic tools. He could only roll his eyes inwardly and accept them so that Master Gu would feel at ease. 2 days after Han Li restored the 5th layer of his cultivation, Master Gu and Wang Changqing paid Han Li a visit with nervous expressions. Han Li wordlessly entered their carriage drawn by strange beasts, and they hurriedly traveled to some area located at the center of the island. 4 hours later, they arrived at a city that seemed to be entirely constructed out of white stone. As they entered the city, they saw a large amount of mortals guarding the city entrance. They wouldn't bother anyone leaving the city, but entering the city would require one to show a command medallion, similar to the one Han Li possessed. But when Han Li was about to enter the city, the guards took out a cylindrical object and shook it at Han Li several times. After it shined with a green light, they gave Han Li a respectful salute and moved to only inspect the medallions of Master Gu and Wang Changqing. Chapter 369, Challenge 1. Han Li sized up the soldiers. Although they didn't possess spiritual power fluctuations, they were full of vigor. It seemed they had trained in some shallow martial arts, but what caught his eye the most was the cylinder. There was actually such a wondrous item that could differentiate cultivators from mortals. Han Li couldn't help but take another look at the cylinder. Wang Changqing saw this and gave Han Li an explanation with a smile. "That is a spirit plate. It allows us mortals to identify who is an immortal." Spirit plate? Han Li was somewhat surprised to hear this, but he immediately thought of the palm-sized jade plate embedded in the cylinder and faintly nodded, not saying anything further. Han Li then detachedly watched as the carriage traveled on the white stone street towards the center of the city. There were countless pedestrians on the street, coming and going without stop or rest. The deeper they went into the city, the livelier it became. A majority of the people wore white. Those that didn't wear white wore a dull yellow, faint green, and other such mild colors. There was no one wearing any bright colors. In addition, those that didn't wear white were clearly of high status. These well-dressed individuals would often have 3 or 4 shabbily dressed subordinates closely following after them. Because there were far too many people and carriages on the street, their carriage was forced to slow down. After spending a long time traveling with such slow speed, their carriage finally arrived at a huge plaza in the city center. The plaza took up about 5 acres and was filled with a huge crowd. All Han Li could see was a vast sea of black-haired heads, hurriedly flowing in every direction without end. Shops lined the plaza, each one fully packed with customers. At the very center, the shops seemed to be made up of temporary booths. They were abnormally overcrowded and were accompanied with fervent chatter. It appeared to be bustling with unusual amounts of activity. Han Li estimated that, with the density of the crowd, there were at least several tens of thousands of people in the plaza. It was naturally impossible to further advance in the carriage through such a large crowd. Master Gu took the lead and descended from the carriage, bringing Han Li and company towards the palace-styled building at the side of the plaza. The palace was over 30 meters tall, far taller than the other buildings around it. The huge gate of the palace was guarded by a line of soldiers with sparkling long spears in their grasp, preventing anybody from casually approaching. This is the Stalwart Star Island's first market day of the 3rd month. That is why there are several times more people here at East Stone City. Basically, the residents from many cities and towns on the eastern part of the island all come here to trade for rarities that would normally be hard to obtain. As Master Gu was leading the way toward the palace, he turned his head and gave Han Li an explanation with a faint smile. Master Gu stepped forward and spoke with the gate guards. A guard then waved his hand, signifying that they could pass. Master Gu hastily called out to Han Li and Wang Chengqing before heading in. Once they passed through the gate, it became much more shaded and quiet. In the corridor past the gate, there were several tens of individuals of seemingly high status having whispered conversations in groups of 3. When they saw Master Gu arrive, they seemed to look at him with hostility. But at this moment, the purple gate at the other end of the corridor opened, revealing a white-clothed youth of about 20 years old. His appearance was delicate and refined, much like that of a frail scholar. The youth gave Han Li a friendly glance before speaking courteously to Master Gu. "Are you Mr. Gu? The others have already arrived. Cultivators that are participating in the challenge must go further in. As for you, Mr. Gu, please wait outside." From a single glance, Han Li was undoubtedly sure that the youth's cultivation was about the same as his current cultivation, the 5th layer of qi condensation. Master Gu could only give Han Li an expectant look before stepping off to the side. Han Li followed the youth through the gate. Afterwards, the gate immediately shut. "My surname is Wen, but fellow Taoists can call me Wen Qiang. You seem quite unfamiliar. Could it be that you're new to our Stalwart Star Island?" "I am Han Li. I've just arrived here last month." Having a month of practice, Han Li was able to speak the local language without problem. How admirable. Daring to journey from your homeland with your current cultivation, Taoist friends' courage and insight must be outstanding. I wouldn't have been able to do it. I've never taken a single step off this island since birth." The youth spoke with admiration. Han Li faintly smiled, but didn't say anything in response. Han Li followed the youth, eventually arriving at a round hall. There were over 30 cultivators there, sitting and standing, each wearing various expressions. A shriveled old man sitting across from the crowd of cultivators spoke quickly. "It seems that everyone has gathered. Let's start drawing lots. Each fight will be decided in 1 round. Killing is forbidden and will result in disqualification." He was the only Foundation establishment cultivator among a room of qi condensation cultivators. It seemed he was the cultivator in charge. Once the youth surnamed Wen entered the hall, he hurriedly went to stand beside the old man and await his orders. The old man didn't pay the youth any attention. Instead, he took out an azure jade cylinder with over 20 bamboo sticks. To participate in the challenge, draw a lot. Once the number of challengers matches the number of the representatives of the incumbent merchants, The remaining challengers will be qualified to challenge them. The majority of the crowd stared at the jade cylinder as it was enveloped in a layer of azure light, concealing the sticks within. Naturally, the light repelled spiritual sense, and upon doing so, the owners of the spiritual sense seemed to have suffered and couldn't help but sway. Those that didn't use their spiritual sense to probe the cylinder revealed schadenfreude. These cultivators naturally wished for Han Li and the other challengers to suffer a disadvantage. As for Han Li, who possessed powerful spiritual sense, he would have no problem forcefully breaking through the azure light. However, this would be far too eye-catching. As such, Han Li could only helplessly look at the others in dismay and take his turn drawing lots. When Han Li went up to draw his lot, he was unexpectedly able to see through the azure light, but all he saw was strange silver characters. He wrinkled his brow in response. He had completely forgotten that he still couldn't read the local writing. But still, Han Li expressionlessly drew a lot as if nothing had happened. "Number 1, the old man coldly shouted. The two cultivators that drew that lot immediately walked forward. The old man bluntly said, "You two will compete on the stage over there. There is a formation set up, so there is no need to fear destruction from magic techniques. It will be your victory if you are able to take away their lot. So long as you don't kill your opponent, I don't care what methods or tricks you use." "Yes, senior." The two participants bowed to the old man before walking towards the elevated platform at the back of the hall. The platform then flashed with white light, and the two disappeared without a trace. Shortly after, the two reappeared on the platform, revealing slight fatigue. One of them animatedly gave the old man 2 bamboo sticks. The other dejectedly walked out from the hall. "Number 2, the old man coldly shouted. Because the battles of chi condensation cultivators were simple, victory was decided extremely quickly. Battles ended almost as soon as they began. But Han Li was baffled to see that regardless of whether they won or lost, they were exceptionally happy. Number 7. A cultivator walked out as soon as the old man yelled, but his opponent hadn't revealed himself. Number 7. The old man yelled again with a gloomy expression. Han Li suddenly walked out and hastily apologized. "Senior, I apologize. I had misread my number. I thought it said 9. The old man didn't pay any mind to what Han Li said and impatiently waved his hand. Han Li then tactfully went up to the platform with his opponent. After a flash of white light, Han Li and his opponent appeared in a world of white mist. The area spanned about 100 meters and was covered by the white mist in every direction. The middle-aged cultivator spoke to Han Li with confidence. "Your cultivation is lower than mine by 2 whole layers. There is no need to fight. Fellow Taoists should forfeit. Else, I might accidentally give you a heavy injury." Seeing that this expert was only a 7th layer chi condensation cultivator and hadn't released a protective barrier like he had, Han Li faintly smiled. Chapter 370, Challenge 2. "What's so funny? I only wish to not injure you out of kindness." When this cultivator saw that Han Li didn't seem to care, he couldn't help but become angry and increasingly flaunt his status as a superior. Han Li tapped the floor with the tip of his foot, indifferently saying, "It's nothing. I only feel that this competition is going to be easier than I had imagined." "What? You dare to look down on me?" The middle-aged cultivator's face completely reddened. He raised his hand and revealed many glistening items, but before he could act, he suddenly saw the person in front of him blur. His vision then blackened, and he fell to the floor not knowing what had happened. A short moment later, Han Li carried the unconscious middle-aged man off the stage with an indifferent expression. When the other cultivators saw this, they were stunned. There was a clear difference in their cultivation, but the victor was Han Li. This was far beyond their expectations. Even the old man, who had appeared moody from the very beginning, revealed an odd expression. He took a deep look at Han Li. Although he didn't say anything, he seemed to know how Han Li had taken action. Han Li chuckled and calmly handed the 2 bamboo sticks to the old man. He then dropped his unconscious opponent to the floor and went over to the group of victorious cultivators. The old man saw that the middle-aged cultivator was still unconscious and lightly shook his head, revealing a mysterious smile. Number 8. When the final victor was decided, the old man looked at the 10 cultivators that hadn't gone on the platform and lightly coughed. He then spoke with an indifferent tone. "We will now start the challenges in order of number. If you feel that your magic power is severely exhausted, you may take a moment to rest before facing your next challenge. However, these challenges must finish by today. It will count as a forfeit otherwise. Also, challengers are forbidden from challenging those who have already fought. As for the extra 11th challenger, they will be allowed to challenge any one of the winning incumbents after the 10 winners have been decided. Now let's start. The first challenger selected the incumbent with the lowest cultivation and entered the stage with him. As his opponent's cultivation was only of the 6th layer and his cultivation was of the 7th, it appeared that he had high odds of winning. But after the time it took to make a cup of tea, the 6th layer cultivator left the stage first. As for the first challenger, he reappeared in a miserable state. He was ashamed and quickly left the hall without a word. The remaining challengers revealed changed expressions. As for the victor, he returned to the other 10 without the slightest of care. Next, the old man shouted. He didn't reveal the slightest surprise, as if he had expected that cultivator to win. "Senior, my magic power is deficient. I wish to rest for a moment." The second chosen cultivator spoke with a slight blush. Number 3. The old man didn't care whether his magic power truly hadn't recovered and shouted the next number. The following cultivator lightly creased his brow and also avoided the next fight. As for the fourth challenger, he appeared to be unwilling to lose face and summoned the courage to choose an opponent, entering the stage. In the end, the same result occurred. The fourth challenger was heavily injured, causing the remaining challengers to all be shaken. Having seen this, the following 2 challengers took the opportunity to delay their fights. They thought that they would be able to make a better choice after seeing how it ended up for the others. The old man's face stirred for a moment, before slowly calling out Han Li's number 7. Han Li silently walked forward and pointed to an opponent with a 6th layer cultivation. The opponent was a burly man. Having seen Han Li fearlessly select him, he suddenly revealed a malicious smile and walked toward the stage in large strides. In contrast, Han Li walked forward with slow steps, as if he was deliberating about the coming match. Soon, Han Li and the burly man disappeared into the white light. Everyone looked in the direction of the stage with interest. The old man then closed his eyes, as if he had extended his spiritual sense. But after a short moment, his cheeks slightly moved. He then opened his eyes and revealed a trace of astonishment. With a flash of white light, a person appeared on the platform. The many cultivators hurriedly turned their gaze. The light faded away to reveal Han Li. He didn't have the slightest injury, but he was dragging his opponent who had his entire body scorched. He leisurely walked off the platform as if he hadn't spent the slightest effort. Not only were the challengers stupefied, even the incumbent opponents also had looks of disbelief on their faces. As for Wen Qiang, who stood behind the old man, his mouth was gaping. He didn't close it until some time later. Han Li dragged his still-breathing opponent towards the old man and left him there, before returning to his original position with a leisurely stride. When the other challengers saw this, they couldn't help but turn their gaze and reveal a trace of reverence. Han Li coldly smiled in his heart. It seemed that regardless of where he went, strength was the most effective method of speech. Perhaps it was because Han Li's unexpected triumph inspired confidence in the remaining challengers. The following challengers didn't avoid their fight and immediately chose an opponent. However, this only resulted in defeat and heavy injuries. The challengers who had delayed their fights were appalled. With their competitive spirits completely extinguished, each one of them had eventually decided to forfeit. After all, they knew that they were no match. Only an idiot would decide to fight regardless. As such, the old man declared that only Han Li, on behalf of the Gu clan, had acquired the qualifications for main island trade. Afterwards, the old man handed a blue jade slip to Han Li and told him it would be settled once he gave that to the Gu clan. The old man then unceremoniously dismissed the cultivators, chasing them out of the hall with his voice. Han Li handed the blue jade slip to Master Gu in the corridor. His expressions were quite marvelous. He appeared incredulous, astonished, and finally ecstatic with joy. "Immortal Han, I am grateful beyond words. Please feel at ease. The Gu clan will definitely fulfill their promise with you." By the time he said these words, Han Li, Master Gu, and Wang Chengqing were already sitting in the carriage and were on their way back to the Gu clan estate. As he was speaking these grateful words, his hands were tightly grasping the jade slip as if he was afraid that it would fly away. It made for quite a funny scene. Leaning against the back of the carriage, Han Li said with a slight smile, "I believe Mr. Gu isn't someone who would abandon their benefactor upon achieving their goals, especially when the benefactor in question is a cultivator." With the warning laced in Han Li's words, Master Gu and Wang Changqing paled and repeatedly said that they didn't dare. Not long after that, Han Li returned to his wooden house on the hill. Crooked Soul was still obediently on guard. Han Li only managed to refine Qi for 3 days before Wang Changqing went to find him. He had come to inform Han Li that Han Li could now go the Immortal Mountains Immortal Records Pavilion and acquire permanent residence at Stalwart Star Island. They would also provide him with a cultivation area. After all, the cultivators of the island all had their own Immortals Cave. Since he hadn't participated in the Great Spirit Land Contest, his area was certain to have thinner spiritual qi, but it would still have enough to be considered an area of cultivation. Han Li pocketed the guarantor's document that the Gu clan had given him and flew towards the center of Stalwart Star Island. Crooked Soul was naturally left behind to guard his small house. On his way, Han Li flew past 7 cities and several tens of small towns, before finally catching view of the Immortal Mountain that Wang Changqing had mentioned. It was a huge azure, tri-peaked mountain that penetrated through the clouds. The sight was truly majestic and beyond lofty. Innumerable smaller peaks surrounded the huge mountain. Han Li was unable to tell how expansive the mountain was from a glance. He blankly stared at this immortal mountain while lost in thought. "HM, aren't you fellow Taoist Han?" Han Li suddenly heard someone call out to him from behind. Han Li was slightly alarmed and hastily turned around. The voice sounded familiar. Not far behind him, the gentle and frail Wen Qiang was looking at him with a smile, flying on his wheel magic tool. After staring blankly for a moment, Han Li responded with a chuckle. "So it was fellow Taoist Wen. What a coincidence." "He, I didn't expect to see you." Fellow Taoist Han was actually able to defeat a cultivator from the Protector Squad. "I really admire you." Protector Squad, Han Li was startled to hear this. Chapter 371, Immortal Records Pavilion. Fellow Taoist Han, the 10 cultivators to be challenged were hired at great expense by the great clans from the island's Protector Squad. Although their cultivation isn't high, their experience and techniques are superior to that of common cultivators, as they have fought demonic beasts at sea and sparred with the cultivators from other islands. Not to mention opponents at the same layer, it wouldn't be odd for them to defeat common cultivators with a cultivation of 3 layers above them. Wen Qiang clicked his tongue with an expression of praise. Han Li smiled and spoke modestly. "It was nothing. I was merely lucky." Han Li had quite a bit of experience with regards to battle. The youth looked in the direction of the Azure Mountain before turning his head around and asking with a smile, "Ah, yes. Fellow Taoist Han came here to handle some formalities at the Immortal Records Pavilion." As this wasn't a matter worth concealing, Han Li calmly answered, "Fellow Taoist Wen guessed correctly. I wish to handle the formalities for settling down on this island and choose a cultivator's residence." Having heard Han Li's destination, Wen Qiang immediately offered a suggestion. "I've been to the Immortal Ascension Pavilion several times already. How about I bring fellow Taoist Han there along the way? It would be hard to look for it alone, considering the size of the Azure Cloud Mountains." Han Li was slightly surprised to see him act so enthusiastically, but he still expressed his thanks and agreed. As such, the two flew side by side toward the large mountain. While the youth was leading the way, he gave Han Li a garrulous explanation of the mountain range. On our island's Azure Cloud Mountains, in addition to the 3 great peaks, the Heavenly Pillar, the Heavenly Knight, and the Heavenly Gate, there are also 367 smaller mountain peaks. The amount of caves among these mountains are countless, and it is said that many of them are capable of being a cultivation area. Naturally, although the majority of the Azure Cloud Mountains have large spirit veins, the density of spiritual qi varies. It is generally said that the taller the mountain's peak, the denser the spiritual qi. As for the 36 mountain peaks with the densest spiritual qi, they are the prizes of the island's decennial Great Spirit Land Contest. Those who feel that their cultivation is greater than the lords of these 36 mountain peaks may challenge them at will. The victor shall become the master of the peak. The differences between the peaks aren't very significant. It is said that as long as a cultivator managed to enter Foundation establishment, they would be able to acquire one of these mountain peaks as a cultivation area. As for qi condensation cultivators, they can only obediently find a valley or cave to use as a cultivation area. Foundation establishment cultivators are able to claim an entire mountain peak for themselves. Han Li was greatly surprised. The youth said with a self-mocking tone, "That's right. However, the Foundation establishment cultivators of the island have already occupied most of them. Us chi condensation cultivators shouldn't think of such hopeful matters. Oh, thoughts churned through Han Li's mind, causing him to grow somewhat excited. Han Li suddenly thought of something and casually asked, "Ah, then the three tallest mountains should have the greatest spiritual chi, yes." Of course. The tallest peak, the heavenly pillar, is the cultivation area of our island's master, Master Mu Long. It is forbidden from entry. It is said that our island's lord is at mid-core formation stage, and his divine abilities are devastating. As for the Heavenly Gate and the Heavenly Night Mountain peaks, they are respectively occupied by Master Yuan Jun and Master Kan Chin. Although the spiritual chi is somewhat lacking in comparison to the heavenly pillar, it is still several times denser than in other areas. Wen Qiang stated with a somewhat envious expression. Han Li slowly asked with raised eyebrows, "Fellow Taoist Wen, are those two core formation seniors as well?" Wen Qiang nodded with a pleased expression. Not only are they early core formation cultivators, they are also Tao companions. Han Li unconsciously frowned. Stalwart Star Island unexpectedly had 3 core formation cultivators. This was truly beyond his expectations. While Han Li was lost in thought, he arrived at the center of the Azure Cloud Mountains with Wen Qiang. They occasionally ran into other cultivators on the way there, but after giving the two of them an indifferent glance, they all flew away, minding their own business. A few minutes later, Han Li and Wen Qiang finally arrived at a relatively tall mountain peak. The peak had a small, 2-story pavilion of unknown age. Not only was its exterior thoroughly worn out and of an outdated design, it also hung a sign on its gate that was missing a corner. The words Immortal Records Pavilion were crookedly written on the sign. Han Li blankly stared. Although he saw the sign, Han Li could not bring himself to believe it. He couldn't help but turn towards Wen Qiang and ask, "This is?" "Although I don't want to admit it, this really is the Immortal Records Pavilion." The youth spread out his arms with an appearance of helplessness. The youth waved his hand and gave Han Li a warning just before he took his leave. "All right, I'm going to leave now. However, fellow Taoists should take note that the senior in charge of the Immortal Records Pavilion has a strange temperament." Han Li indifferently gazed at the youth as he disappeared. After mindlessly shaking his head, he landed in front of the pavilion and walked in with a calm face. Just as he approached the gate, he heard a somewhat gloomy voice, "Come in. The gate isn't locked." Han Li was shocked by the sudden announcement, but he couldn't help but walk toward the pavilion hesitantly. After entering the pavilion, Han Li was left stupefied. The interior sharply contrasted with the outer appearance of the pavilion. It was magnificently decorated. The floor was covered in sparkling fire-red silk, and the walls were made of gold and jade, while countless amounts of sparkling gems glittered on the ceiling. Corners of the building were decorated with many species of gorgeous plants that Han Li had never seen before. There was also an odd stone bed across from him, sparkling with a strange blue light. Although he didn't recognize what it was made out of, they were certain to be some sort of precious materials. A haggard, middle-aged man was currently reclining on it. His clothes were made of dazzling, fire-red demon fur. He was embracing a huge, white pearl as he indifferently glanced at Han Li. Han Li suppressed his amazement and bowed. He then asked with a respectful tone, "Hello, Senior. This one wishes to handle the formalities for taking up residence. May I ask if Senior is in charge of this matter?" The middle-aged man lightly sighed before spiritedly asking, "Taking up residence? Do you have a guarantor?" "I do." Han Li immediately took out the document that the Gu clan member had given him and stepped forward to give it to the man. Han Li didn't dare to belittle him as his spiritual power fluctuations clearly revealed his status as a powerful late Foundation establishment cultivator. The middle-aged man took the signed document from Han Li and swept through it. His eyes then flashed with bright light, sizing Han Li up. Caressing the pearl in his embrace, the middle-aged man indifferently asked, "I have heard that there was a new cultivator on the island that was able to defeat a member of the Protector Squad while at the 5th layer of Qi condensation. Could that have been you?" Han Li was somewhat surprised, but he hastily replied with a modest tone, "Junior only won through a fluke. It wasn't really like that." "Humph, a fluke," the middle-aged man snorted with a cold smile. Han Li inwardly frowned and felt puzzled. The battle only took place several days ago. How does this person know about it? The middle-aged man tightened the demon furs on his body, as if he saw the confusion in Han Li's mind, and calmly said, "That person you defeated from the Protector Squad is my unbecoming disciple. Having lost to someone with a lower cultivation than himself, I've sentenced him to secluded study as punishment. Han Li bitterly smiled after being stunned for a moment, as this was far too coincidental. Han Li became somewhat worried. Could it be that he intended to teach Han Li a lesson on behalf of his disciple? The middle-aged man squinted at Han Li and spoke with an icy tone. "Don't worry. This is a matter between you juniors, and I won't take advantage of you as your senior. I hope that you will fight my unbecoming disciple one more time. After that, I won't pursue the matter any further, regardless of the outcome." Han Li felt his heart relax. Since it is senior's request, junior naturally will not refuse. The middle-aged man was surprised to see Han Li so willingly consent, but soon after, he revealed a satisfied expression. The middle-aged man's hand flashed with white light and the pearl disappeared. He then stood up and slowly said, "Next, I will be handling the matters of your residency." The formalities for residency were actually quite simple. The middle-aged man merely took out a golden book and wrote Han Li's name in it. Han Li also exchanged the green jade medallion he had received from the harbor for a blue jade pendant. The jade pendant twinkled with blue light and was a low-grade magic tool. According to the middle-aged man, the pendant possessed minor waterproofing effects. The effect was quite practical. Next, the middle-aged man tossed a silver booklet towards Han Li. "All of the places shining with golden light have already been taken. The white ones are unoccupied. Choose one to be your cultivation area. Cough, cough." After quickly speaking just a few words, he started to cough without end. The middle-aged man seemed to be afflicted with a truly serious illness. Chapter 372, Minor Expanse Island. Han Li slowly unfolded the booklet before discovering that it was a complete map of Stalwart Star Island. Gold and white light intertwined on the map and flickered with a mysterious radiance. The areas that were sparkling were concentrated at the center of the island, the Azure Cloud Mountain Range. Han Li discovered that the Azure Cloud Mountains were even more expansive than he had imagined. They occupied an entire fourth of the island's area. As Han Li carefully examined the sparkling areas of white light, he couldn't help but squint his eyes. There were half as many of the gold lights as white lights. However, the white lights were of varying brightness. Some were blinding while others were dull. The mountain peaks that were marked with blinding light weren't even considered by Han Li, as the middle-aged man had already explained. Qi condensation cultivators don't have the qualifications to choose the mountain peaks. As for the other areas, they don't have those restrictions, so long as they are an area marked by white light. This was exactly the same as when Qiang had told him, but there were only valleys and caves left to choose from, and these all possessed dim white lights. After looking at the map for a moment, he raised his head and asked the middle-aged man with a serious tone, "Junior wishes to ask a question. Are there any restrictions on how large an area I can use to establish my immortals cave?" The middle-aged man was somewhat surprised, but soon replied with a mocking tone, "You may set up any formation spells and restrictions you choose within a radius of 5 kilometers, so long as you have the room for it, that is." Han Li calmly said, "Then can Junior pick this place? Since this place is also marked by a white light, shouldn't there be a spirit vein there?" He lightly tapped a certain spot on the map, causing a white light to flash to yellow. Han Li then handed the picture book back to the middle-aged man. There, the middle-aged man's pale face revealed surprise upon seeing where Han Li had pointed. The place was an area outside of Stalwart Star Island. It had previously been flashing with a weak white light. That is Minor Expanse Island. The island is only about 35 kilometers long, but it does have a small spirit vein that is a few kilometers long. We laid down a small defensive formation spell and established a small village on the island. A few hundred people currently live there. The middle-aged man spoke with a mysterious smile that revealed hints of mockery. Han Li remained silent. He knew that since the middle-aged man wore such an expression, this island was certain to have its complications. "This small island is of little interest to Stalwart Star Island. We only held onto it because it would be a shame to abandon the spirit vein. Its spiritual qi density is greatly inferior to that of other islands, and its area is small. It's true that other cultivators won't bother you if you choose that area, but its spiritual qi density is only 2/3 of that found in the Azure Cloud Mountains. As such, your cultivation speed would be quite a bit slower than the cultivators staying on this island. There were previously other cultivators like yourself that loved to bitterly cultivate in isolation. However, those cultivators would inevitably return after only a few years. They would rather spend a large amount of spirit stones to choose a new cultivation area than to continue staying on that island. After all, spiritual chi density is the most important factor to cultivators. Furthermore, those who select this island must also undertake the responsibility of protecting it. You would be the one to pay for the spirit stone expenditure of the island's defensive formation spells. Naturally, you would receive a certain amount of spirit stones as compensation from the residents of the island, and you won't have to pay tribute to the island's master. But I must warn you that the spirit stones you receive in compensation won't be enough to sustain the daily usage of the defensive formation. The island's spirit stone consumption has been sustained up until now by Stalwart Star Island. The middle-aged cultivator lazily pointed out the rule while tapping the bedside. After muttering to himself for a moment, Han Li eventually asked in a soft voice, "If I choose that small island, doesn't that mean I would in fact become the island's master?" You could think of it that way," the middle-aged man replied with some surprise. He had already laid out the island's shortcomings. If this youth still wanted to choose that island, it was none of his business. The middle-aged man thoughtfully sized up Han Li once more and inwardly sneered. He would spend a huge amount of spirit stones before long, and come to complain without end. He was convinced that within 2 years at most, this young cultivator would come back with gray hair and a haggard complexion to choose a new cultivation area. Why else would such a position, being the master of a small island, remain uncontested until now? After some more thought, Han Li spoke without further hesitation. "All right, this junior will pick the minor expanse island." Having heard that Han Li was certain, the middle-aged cultivator didn't hesitate. He took out a golden brush and lightly dabbed the island on the map. The island's white light immediately turned golden. He then searched his robes for a jade slip, which he then wrote a few characters on with his golden brush before tossing it to Han Li. Han Li lowered his head to look at the jade slip and saw that there were 2 golden characters on it. They seemed familiar, as if it were his name written in the local characters. This jade slip is evidence that Minor Expanse Island is your cultivation area and contains the names of the island's inhabitants. Make sure to hold on to it properly, the middle-aged man indifferently said. Afterwards, he put away the booklet and laid back down on the stone bed. He then waved his arm at Han Li, obviously shooing him away. Han Li gave him a quick salute before tactfully leaving. Exiting the Immortal Records Pavilion, Han Li had no inclination to sightsee around the Azure Cloud Mountains or meet other cultivators. Instead, he directly flew back to the Gu clan estate. On the morning of the next day, Han Li left a letter for Master Gu on the desk in his room. Then he brought Crooked Soul with him to the closest village and bought a map of Stalwart Star Island and its nearby territories before heading straight towards the harbor. Wang Changqing had told Han Li previously that the island's largest city, Stalwart Star City, was located in the western part of Stalwart Star Island. That city had a market by the name of Sky Capital Market, where cultivators traded items. Although Han Li wished to go there and see what the cultivators overseas possessed and learn their cultivation arts, his current cultivation was pathetically weak. As such, he was fearful to go to an area with many cultivators, and reluctantly dropped the idea. As Han Li flew to the harbor, he muttered to himself with ridicule, "With my strength lacking, my courage suffers as well." He didn't choose a cultivation area at the Azure Cloud Mountains, favoring the vacant Minor Expanse Island, where the spiritual chi was thinner. This decision was so that he wouldn't have to go through great pains to conceal the secret of his small bottle. Only at an isolated island far away from other cultivators would he be able to freely cultivate the spiritual medicines required to massively increase his cultivation, without attracting any unwanted attention. Although his cultivation speed would somewhat suffer as a result, the spiritual chi would still be enough to cultivate spiritual herbs. After all, he mainly relied on consuming refined spiritual medicines for his cultivation. Having thinner spiritual chi wouldn't influence him too greatly. Han Li flew out of Stalwart Star Island's huge island-wide restriction from the port. Following the map, he headed straight towards Minor Expanse Island. On the map, the island was located right beside Stalwart Star Island, but only after flying for an entire day on his Divine Wind boat was he able to spot it. After flying once around the island, Han Li found the entrance to the island's formation spell, a small dock. Han Li then slowly descended towards it. There were very few people on the dock, with only about a dozen fishermen sitting on small boats beside the port. Once they saw Han Li and Crooked Soul descend from the sky, they got off their boats and gathered together to see Han Li. The crowd walked towards Han Li and saluted him one by one. A particularly burly man with a dark face separated himself from the crowd and paid his respects to Han Li. It seemed this person was the head fisherman. This humble one is Hai Gui. He pays his respects to Immortal Master. Is this minor expanse island? Although Han Li felt that he wasn't mistaken, it was best to be prudent. Hai Gui asked with a puzzled expression. Yes, it is, great immortal. Has Immortal Master come to replace the spirit stones already? It hasn't been that long since they were last changed. Having heard that this really was Minor Expanse Island, Han Li let out a breath of relief. With a faint smile, he spoke to those present. I didn't come to replace the spirit stones. From now on, I will be the one providing the spirit stones for the island, as this small island has become my cultivation area. You may all call me Immortal Han. Under the astonished gazes of the fishermen, Han Li called out to Crooked Soul, and they flew towards the center of the island. Chapter 373, External Reincarnation. The sole village on this small island was at the east end, near its port. In the west was a small mountain range of about 10 kilometers with only two small mountains. The higher mountain was about a kilometer tall, while the shorter one was only about 400 meters tall. Han Li gazed at the mountains from afar before suppressing the excitement in his heart, deciding to pay a visit to the village first. Han Li's and Crooked Soul's arrival caused quite a stir. An old man, the self-proclaimed village head, immediately stepped forward to see Han Li. After letting the old man inspect the gold symbols on the jade slip, the village head immediately declared that the entire village must obey the great immortal's orders. Naturally, Han Li didn't have any use for the assistance of mortals. Instead, he asked about the issues he was most concerned with, the general circumstances of the island, and the amount of spirit stones the villagers were able to contribute towards maintaining the island's protective formation. After hearing that the amount added up to almost nothing, Han Li became somewhat gloomy. Didn't this mean that he had to contribute all of the spirit stones? That middle-aged man said the residents would be contributing a portion of spirit stones consumed by the protective formation. It seemed like those were merely pleasant words. Their help wouldn't amount to anything. Han Li inwardly cursed at the middle-aged cultivator, but spoke a few reassuring words to the old man. He estimated the amount of spirit stones required and compared it to the old man's estimate of their contribution. Han Li then gave the old man a year's worth of spirit stones to sustain the formation spell. He then told the old man that in the coming years, he could go to his immortal's cave and pick up the spirit stones required for that year. Then, without paying attention to the old man's repeated thanks, Han Li and Crooked Soul flew towards the island's west side. Once Han Li entered the mountain range known by the island's inhabitants as the Minor Expanse Mountains, he was whelmed by the feeling of faint spiritual qi, causing his heart to stir. A short moment later, Han Li was standing at the front of his divine wind boat as he circled both mountain peaks. It was obvious that the spiritual qi was richer on the higher mountain peak, but the lower mountain peak was thicker and more solid. Not only was it more suitable for an immortal's cave, it was also the site of a previous cultivator's immortal's cave. The present immortal's cave was intact and undamaged. It seemed suitable for immediate occupation. Han Li sunk into thought for a moment on his divine wind boat. His eyes then flashed with spirited light, and he came to a decision. He first flew towards the thicker, shorter mountain peak and entered the deepest, most secretive area of the immortal's cave. Afterwards, he fiercely struck the ground with his magic tools. Half a day later, the initial makings of an underground passage had been created. It had a 9-meter diameter and headed straight towards the base of the mountain. But when Han Li's passage had reached a dozen meters below the mountain's base, he suddenly changed direction towards the base of the other mountain over a kilometer away. Although Han Li's magic tool was incomparably sharp, having Crooked Soul's assistance shortened the time required for this massive undertaking to 2 days. After carving out a passage between the bases of the mountains, Han Li carved out a new immortal's cave inside of the taller mountain in the style of his old immortal's cave in the heavenly south region. This new immortal's cave was cut in exactly the same shape as his old one in the Taiyue mountain range, but this time, there was no exit except for the underground tunnel. This would be the place where Han Li would cultivate and grow spiritual herbs. Having the original cave dwelling as a cover for the true one, Han Li felt much safer. After finishing up with his immortal's cave, Han Li then set up the first 5 elements reversal formation at the entrance of the shorter, thicker mountain. but after Han Li flew around the two mountains for a while, he still felt uneasy. He took out the sets of formation setup tools that Xin Ryan had given him and chose to deploy two of the more impressive formation, the fierce heavenly wind formation and the illusory heaven-sifting formation. These two formation spells had a wide range and would cover both of the mountains entirely. Although they weren't as wondrous as the 5 elements reversal formation, they would still prove to be quite troublesome for Foundation establishment cultivators. As such, Han Li's cave dwelling would be entirely safe from everything below the level of core formation cultivators. Looking from the sky outside of the formation, the mountains were enshrouded in a misty fog and were hard to make out. Han Li faintly smiled at the sight and slowly descended into the mist, disappearing from sight. After entering the true Immortals' cave, Han Li continually busied himself instead of taking the chance to rest. First, he established a secretive medicinal garden with a few spiritual herbs. After all, if he wished to mature them, they must first become young sprouts. Then Han Li gazed at the bottle as if it were as precious as his own life before burying it in the corner of the garden and covering it with the concealing magic treasure fragment he had bought so long ago. He also made a hidden vent in the cave wall, allowing it to condense the green liquid. Afterwards, he created several tens of secret rooms of varying sizes in accordance to the controlling spirit sect cultivators' insect breeding insights. He placed the white spiders and other wondrous insects inside them before placing several restrictions nearby to prevent them from running away. After finishing the most important matters, Han Li decided that it was still not the time to meditate and refine qi. Instead, he carefully took out the light gray jade slip that he had acquired from the Emperor of Yue. It contained many strange secret techniques, including the external reincarnation technique he had set his eyes on long ago. Han Li immersed his spiritual sense into the jade slip and carefully read through the cultivation methods of this technique several times. Afterwards, he withdrew his spiritual sense and began contemplating what he had read. Although Han Li had previously come to a decision, after carefully thinking it over, he felt that cultivating this technique was truly dangerous. Jade slip clearly said that if his refined clone were to be destroyed, the spiritual sense planted within the clone would be destroyed and irrecoverable. Furthermore, if his remaining spiritual sense wasn't strong enough, it would be greatly damaged. At best, this would result in madness. At worst, he would suffer from qigong deviation and perish. In addition, even if he was successful, the external reincarnation would only be an easily controlled high-level puppet that could cultivate. This was completely different from the rumored ability to split oneself into two, and was inferior to the divine abilities possessed by some cultivator clans. However, Han Li had the 5-element blood cores, and had a great opportunity to create a clone with a fiend core. This was an extremely rare stroke of luck where he could obtain a puppet guard with the strength of a core formation cultivator. Although the puppet would only be considered to be at early core formation, he would still have the power to defend himself against any Foundation establishment cultivator. The most difficult and crucial aspect of cultivating a clone was that it required a corpse with spiritual roots. But Han Li was already in possession of a suitable corpse, Crooked Soul, a soulless refined corpse he had acquired long ago. It stands to reason that extracting a cultivator's soul, especially that of a low-grade cultivator, would cause the body's meridians to rupture due to the overbearing nature of the magic technique used, disallowing any further cultivation. This was why so many cultivators viewed Crooked Soul with surprise when they saw that a corpse possessed spiritual qi fluctuations. Although cases where a soul was extracted from a cultivator's body with its meridians intact did exist, they were flukes that wouldn't be encountered even once in 100 times. Unfortunately, this external reincarnation technique required the body to be intact after its soul had been extracted, and that the cultivator must be of the 6th layer or lower. Such a suitable corpse would be hard to come by. Although Han Li didn't know why there were such strange requirements, he surmised that it probably had something to do with the ease of controlling the corpse after inserting a thread of spiritual sense into it. Han Li might not know exactly how Yu Zidong and Dr. Mo created Crooked Soul, but Crooked Soul definitely satisfied all the requirements, making it an exceptionally good candidate for refining a clone. As for the Emperor of Yue, it probably took an unknown amount of dead low-grade cultivators before he happened upon a suitable corpse. Han Li sat cross-legged on the ground and pondered for a long time before deciding to cultivate the great development technique to the 2nd layer prior to refining the corpse. With that accomplished, he wouldn't suffer much damage even if the clone perished. He had a deep understanding of the wondrous effects that the Great Development Technique would have on strengthening his spiritual sense. Before he could cultivate the Great Development Technique, he would first have to recover his foundation establishment cultivation. In order to cultivate the external reincarnation technique, he would even have to cultivate to late foundation establishment. After attempting to refine a clone, regardless of success or failure, Han Li would still have to fumble about with cultivating the 3 essence revolutions. After all, this cultivation art along with the Azure Essence Sword art would be a crucial step along the great path towards core formation stage. Having mentally planned out his future cultivation, Han Li entered a secret room in his Immortals cave and began to refine qi with the aid of medicinal pills. He only took the yellow dragon pill and the gold marrow pill for now, 2 low-grade medicine pills. Taking foundation establishment pills at his current stage would be far too violent for his body. It would be more appropriate to wait until after he had reached the 7th layer of qi condensation before taking them. Without a bottleneck to foundation establishment, Han Li reckoned that he should be able to recover his cultivation relatively quickly. Chapter 374, Cultivation is Timeless. Time passed day after day. Apart from maturing spiritual herbs and refining the required yellow dragon pills and golden marrow pills, Han Li refined qi in bitter meditation the entire time. He also periodically trained the white spiders and other wondrous insects in accordance to the controlling spirit sect cultivators' insect cultivation insights. This could be considered his sole joy during his cultivation. Han Li estimated that it would take him about a year to enter the 9th layer of qi condensation, a speed that was swift as wind when compared to his original speed. However, Han Li was still somewhat unsatisfied at this speed. After he reached the 9th layer, he steeled his resolve to take 3 foundation establishment pills in succession. By using its immensely strong medicinal power, Han Li only took another year to enter foundation establishment. Now, he was able to make use of innate true fear. Han Li immediately ceased taking low-grade medicine pills and started to refine medicine pills that would be more suitable for a foundation establishment cultivator. According to Han Li's assumptions, the qi refining powder would have no effect on him because he had previously taken too much of it. As for the other 3 pill recipes, they should be able to vigorously advance him to late foundation establishment without question. But as according to his original plans, Han Li wasn't going to immediately deepen his cultivation. Instead, he would only stockpile medicines and cultivate the Great Development Technique in preparation to refine a clone. In the past, Han Li only needed half a year to cultivate the Great Development Technique to the 1st layer and receive its exceptional benefits. Although Han Li felt gloomy about his inferior aptitude for elemental magic techniques, he had significant talent for the Great Development Technique. Thus, Han Li held much confidence in cultivating to the 2nd layer of the Great Development Technique. According to the incomplete collection of the Great Development Technique, his spiritual sense would be several times stronger, and he would also be able to separate his consciousness into over 100 different strands. When combined with the puppet technique, the frightening potential of the Great Development Technique would be fully displayed. Although he knew that cultivating to the 2nd layer would be more difficult than the first, it took far more time than Han Li had anticipated. He had originally believed that it would only take him 3 years to reach the 2nd layer of the Great Development Technique, but Han Li discovered that it would take 6 years of diligent cultivation for him to barely reach the 2nd layer. As this would take twice the time that he had anticipated, Han Li felt extremely helpless. When Han Li recalled the head-splitting torture he endured while forcefully cultivating the technique, Han Li turned pale and felt great trepidation. During the 3rd year of cultivating the Great Development Technique, the disciple of the middle-aged cultivator from the Immortal Records Pavilion came under orders to challenge Han Li at Minor Expanse Island. As a result, he had been trapped in Han Li's formations for 3 entire days before Han Li happened to take notice of him and released him. Due to the difficulty of cultivating the Great Development Technique, Han Li had completely forgotten about this matter. Using his nameless qi restraining technique to hide his true cultivation, Han Li managed to win by the slightest margin. Under the belief that Han Li had only won due to his slightly superior magic tools, the flustered man who had been trapped within the formation spells for several days could only resentfully return. Another 3 years later, Han Li finally managed to cultivate to the 2nd layer of the Great Development Technique, and now prepared to cultivate the External Reincarnation Technique. He first thoroughly relaxed for several days. With his soul at its peak state, he called for Crooked Soul to enter his hidden practice room and sit cross-legged in front of him. Han Li waved his arm, shutting the stone door to the room and staring at Crooked Soul with rapt attention in long silence. Having seen Crooked Soul's ugly yet familiar face, surges of emotion flowed through Han Li's heart. He recalled matters he had long and quickly forgotten: the Seven Mysteries Sect, the Rainbow Mountains, and a certain familiar figure. But after staring at Crooked Soul's cold, soulless gaze, Han Li let out a sigh. With no further hesitation, Han Li formed a windmill-shaped incantation gesture with his hands, and his body released a weak green light, turning the whole room dark green in color. Not long after that, Han Li's face slightly grimaced in the green light, and fine beads of sweat started to form on his forehead. A blinding white radiance then shot out from his eyes that none would dare to look at. "Huh?" Han Li suddenly let out a roar as his hands formed a strange incantation gesture. Though his body was still, he snorted out a thumb-sized green ball of light. It quickly flew into Crooked Soul's nostril and entered the rest of his body. At this moment, Han Li was deathly pale with huge beads of sweat dripping down from his face, but the blinding light from his eyes became even brighter. Two fine streaks of white light then shot out from his eyes into Crooked Soul's. Han Li's and Crooked Soul's bodies then simultaneously shivered. The stone door of the hidden practice room remained closed for an entire month. In the middle of the next month, the stone door of the hidden room slowly opened, revealing a haggard but extremely excited Han Li. The clone refinement had been a bitter and tortuous struggle, but it had eventually resulted in success. Although he didn't know precisely how it turned out, he knew that at the very least he hadn't failed and there was no cultivation backlash, much to Han Li's relief. But immediately after Han Li left the hidden room, he entered another room and went into seclusion. The clone refinement had significantly damaged his origin chi. If he didn't immediately take medicine and refine his chi, there was a danger that he would once again drop down to the chi condensation stage. As for the refined clone, Crooked Soul, it continued to remain in the hidden room. The thread of consciousness had yet to completely control the corpse and was being broken in. After a few short months, Han Li had fully recovered the damage to his origin chi. But instead of leaving seclusion, he began to research the three essence revolutions, cultivation art. The three essence revolutions, cultivation art clearly stated that when cultivators reached late foundation establishment, they were to scatter a majority of their cultivation through the azure essence sword art and recultivate from early foundation establishment stage. This would compress one's true essence and allow one to draw as close as possible to solidification, weakening the bottleneck to the core formation stage. According to the speculations of the expert who created this cultivation art, after 3 cycles of recultivation, one should have a 50% possibility of forming a golden core. Although Han Li had unexpectedly scattered his cultivation during mid-foundation establishment, instead of scattering his cultivation when he reached late foundation establishment, he didn't care in the least. To Han Li, the difference between scattering one's cultivation during mid-foundation establishment instead of late foundation establishment was only a small degree of true essence condensation. With the main idea of true essence compression and solidification still at the center, there shouldn't be any big problems if he were to scatter his cultivation 2 more times from late foundation establishment. After several months of single-minded study of the 3 essence revolutions, cultivation art, he came to a full understanding of the cultivation art and entered his hidden room with a large amount of medicine pills. He had come to a resolute decision that he wouldn't leave his immortal's cave until he finished the first revolutions of his cultivation art and reached the 6th layer of the azure essence sword art. As for Crooked Soul, who was now completely fused with Han Li's spiritual sense, Han Li had tirelessly prepared pre-foundation establishment medicine pills for him. Because Crooked Soul had spiritual roots with 3 elements, he had greater aptitude than Han Li, who had false spiritual roots with 4 elements. As a result, Crooked Soul's cultivation speed was insanely fast with the assistance of medicine pills, no slower than Han Li's recultivation speed. According to Han Li's estimates, it would only take 2 years for him to reach foundation establishment. In addition, Han Li picked out the devilish art, divine bloodlight, from the jade slip that emitted gray light for Crooked Soul to cultivate after he reached foundation establishment. After all, Han Li had personally seen the might of this devilish art from the Emperor of Yue himself. As for the fact that this art didn't have any continuation for core formation cultivators, Han Li didn't mind it at all. This was because, After Crooked Soul had formed a fiend core, he would forever be stuck at early core formation. There would be no difference whether or not there was a continuation of the magic art. Han Li's cultivation session went on for a truly long time. It was the same as the common saying, cultivation is timeless. In the mere blink of an eye, over 20 years had passed. During this large expanse of time, Han Li didn't take a single step outside of his immortal's cave, nor did he show himself to the island's inhabitants. Ever since Han Li arrived at Minor Expanse Island, several hundred of its inhabitants would say that he nearly hadn't affected them at all. If they wanted to fish, they fished. If they wanted to farm, then they farmed. Naturally, the inhabitants weren't too comfortable to discover that their two mountains were now constantly shrouded in a thick white fog. But after such a long period of time, the villagers became accustomed to the scene and no longer took notice of it. However, the village elder would repeatedly warn the village's mischievous children not to approach the mountain's nearby fog under any circumstances. This was because once someone entered the fog, they would disappear without a trace and couldn't come out. Only after suffering several days of entrapment and shouting out, "Immortal Master Han," several times would they discover a path out. Because this matter had occurred several times, the villagers came to understand that Immortal Han disliked having others bother him. Apart from wood chopping and fruit picking, no other affairs were carried out near the Minor Expanse Mountains. As for the yearly expenditure of spirit stones for the protective formation, so long as the village head loudly shouted towards the mountain a few times, the yearly amount of spirit stones would fly out of the white mist on a tray. Those that came for spirit stones never went back empty-handed. Of course, the original village head had passed away during these 20 years. The current village head was the dark-skinned fisherman Han Li had seen when he first arrived at the island, Hai Gui. However, he still fetched spirit stones in the exact same manner. As such, while the inhabitants of the island weren't particularly loyal towards Immortal Han, they still had a decent impression of him. Then one day, Han Li walked out of his immortal's cave. Chapter 375, Pair of Beauties. Stalwart Star Island's port was as lively as it had been previously. A great number of ships of all sizes scuttled about, either heading out to sea or docking on land. Occasionally, brilliant lights of various colors would flash from the sky, revealing the cultivators that were flying about. The mortals on the ground didn't view it to be odd. They were long accustomed to such sights. But today, a streak of white light flew into the island at the speed of lightning. After pausing for a short moment at the harbor, it flew straight into the depths of the island. If someone close to the white light were to see through it, they would notice the faint silhouette of two people. Han Li with magic power at the peak of Foundation Establishment, due to completing the first revolution of the three essence revolutions technique, and Crooked Soul, whose cultivation was about the same as Han Li as a result of the huge quantities of medicinal pills used during cultivation. Having compressed his true essence for over 20 years, Han Li's cultivation was purer and deeper than other cultivators of similar rank. As for Crooked Soul, Han Li was extremely happy to find that his cultivation had nearly caught up to his own. If Crooked Soul didn't require certain particular secondary ingredients to form his fiend core, and Han Li wasn't required to perform preparations before attempting to form his own core, he wouldn't have left his immortal's cave at Minor Expanse Island. For this outing, apart from collecting on Master Gu's promise of spirit stones and handling his previously mentioned affairs, Han Li would return straight to Minor Expanse Island. As he was at a crucial point in his cultivation, he couldn't allow any distractions. With that in mind, Han Li and Crooked Soul flew deeper into the island towards Stalwart Star City. Since he still had quite a few spirit stones, he had no need to rush towards the Gu estate. He would first buy a few things before visiting there on the way back. Many hours later, Han Li could faintly see the tall walls of a huge city. Although he hadn't been to Stalwart Star City before, the markings on the map and the majestic, imposing aura of the city left no room for doubt. Han Li suddenly stamped his foot on the Divine Wind boat, wishing to descend. However, Han Li was surprised to have run across an obviously placed restriction. The city truly deserved to be called the greatest city in Stalwart Star Island. Its large-scale sky restriction could even cover such a large area. In truth, with Han Li's peak foundation establishment cultivation, he could easily break through the restrictions and continue on his way, at most using up only a bit more magic power. However, Han Li didn't wish to attract attention. Instead, he stepped on the front end of his Divine Wind boat, causing it to slowly descend. Han Li and Crooked Soul calmly disembarked from the Divine Wind boat. After putting away the divine wind boat in his storage pouch, Han Li looked at the huge city from a distance and couldn't help but leisurely walk towards it with an unconcealed smile. Stalwart Star City was at least 4 times larger than East Stone City. As Han Li was walking on some street in Stalwart Star City, he noticed that the roads were wide enough to fit several carriages side by side and felt somewhat impressed by their size. Soon after, Han Li asked a mortal for the location of the Sky Capital Market. The two then headed towards the northern part of the city without delay. This is the so-called Sky Capital Market. Han Li looked at the scene before him with surprise. He saw a huge misty barrier covering the entire northern section of Stalwart Star City. There were at least over 100 streets there, which was completely incongruous with his mental image of an isolated street. But what surprised Han Li the most was that at the center of the northern district, there was a huge pavilion floating over 100 meters in the air. The pavilion was an alluring emerald green, and it released a faint glimmer seemingly made of an enormous piece of jade. It was extremely eye-catching. Han Li stared blankly at the sparkling reflections of sunlight that shined off of the pavilion. Although he didn't know how this pavilion came to be or why it was floating, Han Li truly felt that it was an extremely rare sight. At this moment, Han Li's expression changed. He suddenly restrained his spiritual qi, maintaining the external appearance of an 8th-layer qi condensation cultivator. Soon after, Han Li heard footsteps from behind him, followed by a pleasant female voice. Is this seniors and fellow Taoists' first time at Sky Capital Market? Cultivators that see the Dreamcloud Pavilion for the first time usually remain stunned for quite a long time. The woman's voice was as pleasant as an oriole's chirp. Han Li turned around to see a group of 3 male cultivators and 2 female cultivators standing about a dozen steps away. The 2 women were quite charming, beautiful, and dressed quite boldly. Their simple garments not only revealed their pure white arms and their flawless lower legs, but they also didn't wear any shoes or socks, revealing their beautiful feet. But what was even more eye-catching were the shining, exquisite golden bands that they wore on their foreheads and wrists, giving them an even more provocative presence. The 3 men had rather ordinary appearances, and one of them even had a face full of pockmarks, appearing quite unsightly. These 5 were qi condensation cultivators of about the 10th layer. It seemed they were also going to enter the light barrier. After taking a few more glances at these world-shocking women, Han Li bewilderedly asked, "You fellow Taoists are?" "I'm Yan Li and this is my good friend Yuan Yao. We are rogue cultivators from a nearby island. We heard that rare materials from other islands would be sold here today. These 3 are fellow Taoists that we've met on the way here. We all came together to take a look." The one who spoke was a pleasant, dainty, round-faced woman. She sized up Han Li and Crooked Soul with great curiosity and smiled as she spoke. Judging from her voice, she was the one who had previously asked the question. The woman by her side was an astonishing beauty at the prime of her youth. Not only did her skin appear beyond soft and purer than snow, her skin-tight clothes revealed her graceful, well-endowed body, causing men who saw her to involuntarily swallow. She truly was a beauty capable of wrecking a country. However, this woman didn't look at Han Li. Her bright and beautiful eyes were stuck onto Crooked Soul with an astonished expression on her dainty face. Han Li inwardly frowned upon seeing this. Although Han Li had concealed his true cultivation with a qi condensation technique, Crooked Soul's late foundation establishment cultivation was completely out in the open. According to Han Li, by having a late foundation establishment cultivator accompanying him, he would be able to avoid most trouble and prevent any other cultivators from maliciously targeting him. Admittedly, having an expert with awesome strength such as Crooked Soul was truly a bit too eye-catching. With that in mind, Han Li calmly said, "We've let our fellow Taoists see a funny sight. I am Han Li and this is my martial uncle Crooked Soul. This is our first time at the Sky Capital Market." The dainty woman named Yan Li replied with a charming giggle. "It was like I said. This was definitely Senior Crooked Soul's and fellow Taoist Han's first time seeing the Dreamcloud Pavilion. Otherwise, why else would they stand still? How about we go in together? Senior Marshall's sister and I can introduce you two to the many shops of the Sky Capital Market." Although we aren't natives to Stalwart Star Island, we have visited the Sky Capital Market several times before and know it like the back of our hands. The peerless beauty, Yuan Yao, then spoke with an enthusiastic gaze and a charming smile that men couldn't refuse. "Yes, if Senior Crooked Soul doesn't find it undesirable, us 2 Marshall sisters can act as a guide for Senior so that he may spend less time finding the things he wishes to buy." Upon hearing this, The three male cultivators who were traveling together with them couldn't help revealing unsightly expressions. But in the face of Crooked Soul, a Foundation establishment senior, they could only silently sulk. Hanley felt stunned. This was the first time he had encountered beautiful women who took the initiative to accompany him. However, it seemed that the two were most interested in the senior, Crooked Soul with his deep cultivation. Hanley was merely an incidental addition. Although he didn't know what the two women had in mind, Hanley had no intention of accompanying such provocatively beautiful women. As such, Hanley controlled the previously silent Crooked Soul to hoarsely speak. "There is no need. I don't like keeping company in large numbers. Marshal Nephew Han, let us go on our way." Crooked Soul then grabbed the somewhat apologetic Hanley and made large strides toward the light barrier, revealing no intention of conversing with the two women. Crooked Soul's stiff demeanor left the two women stunned. While they appeared very disappointed, the three male cultivators' spirits were strongly roused, and they inwardly felt great joy. "Let it be, young ladies. That senior Crooked is a man with a strange temperament. We'd better go in too," the pockmarked man said, attempting to curry favor with the two women. The two peerless beauties took a look at each other and agreed with a forced smile, entering the light barrier with light steps. By this time, Hanley and Crooked Soul had long disappeared into the market streets without a trace. When the two women saw this, they wore a helpless expression and entered a randomly chosen store. Chapter 376, Spirit Snow Water and Liquid Heaven Fire. As the two women entered the store, closely followed by the three male cultivators who were unwilling to part with them, Hanley and Crooked Soul appeared from behind a building. Seeing the two women enter the store, Hanley revealed a thoughtful expression. After looking on for a moment, he brought Crooked Soul to another street. At first glance, the shops here and the mortal shops outside appeared no different. The shops here were laid in rows on each side of the street in even squares and carried signboard and flags at their storefront with names such as Wu's Assorted Goods, Chen Jai's Magic Tools, 5 Elements Magic Tools Store, and Hu Yang's Raw Materials. Hanley didn't enter these shops, instead choosing to walk down the street towards the center of the Sky Capital Market. According to Hanley's experiences, the powerful stores should be positioned in the best area, and that's below the Dreamcloud Pavilion. As Hanley grew closer, he looked at the fantastical pavilion in the sky and couldn't help but hurry his steps. At this moment, the market streets had quite a number of cultivators going about their way, entering stores on occasion. After walking about a kilometer, Hanley knew he had found the right place. His eyes lit with realization upon seeing a huge plaza that spanned about half an acre. Stripes of fine, white jade filled the floor of the plaza, making for a sight of refined beauty. The center of the plaza was completely empty aside from the Dreamcloud Pavilion floating above it. It floated above with its doors shut, lacking any intention of inviting visitors. 6 small, uniquely styled palace pavilions towered around the plaza, each a similar distance away from the center. They faintly seemed to stand in opposition of each other. No other store dared to place themselves among these 6 stores at the plaza. After taking another glance at the pavilion, Hanley brought his gaze towards the 6 palace pavilions on the ground. The Mountain Sea Pavilion, White Water Pavilion, Jade Band Pavilion. Hanley muttered the names of these 6 stores to himself as he sized up the nearby cultivators that were entering and leaving them. He wanted to enter the store with clientele of the highest status. But after a moment, Hanley frowned and couldn't help but inwardly curse. The customers of these stores were all of nearly the same status. After taking a round trip examining the 6 palace pavilions, he felt both reluctance and excitement. Feeling gloomy, Hanley attentively sized up the 6 stores once more, and this time he discovered something odd. The symbols embroidered on the banners outside each of the stores seemed to hold some sort of unique, deeper meaning. The Mountain Sea Pavilion's banner was embroidered with a blue mythical animal. The White Water Pavilion had a small, golden sword. The Jade Band Pavilion had a green mushroom. Upon seeing this, Hanley felt that he had been mistaken. After a moment of thought, he walked over to the store nearest him, the White Water Pavilion, in order to confirm his thoughts. Crooked Soul naturally followed after him without a sound. Upon entering the palace hall of the White Water Pavilion, he found the interior to be somewhat large, about 100 meters wide. There were rows of white jade engraved shelves that displayed nearly 100 sparkling magic tools of all colors, but with a quick look, Hanley found that these magic tools were all only high-grade magic tools at best. They were simply beneath him. In front of the shelves stood 5 sharply dressed attendants in azure clothes, all currently taking care of about 8 cultivators who were selecting a few magic tools. But once Han Li and Crooked Soul entered, a sharp-eyed attendant noticed that Crooked Soul was a Foundation establishment cultivator. Although he couldn't tell the exact depth of Crooked Soul's cultivation, he still hurriedly rushed forward with bright eyes. After giving Crooked Soul a formal salute, he smartly asked, "Senior, what magic tools do you wish to buy? Since common magic tools are certain to be beneath you, how about Senior accompany me to the side room? The shopkeeper has acquired a few new top-grade magic tools. Shall we go take a look?" Han Li couldn't help but silently smile upon hearing such exquisitely crafted words. "Lead the way, Junior. I'll take a look for now." Having heard Crooked Soul's arrogant tone, the attendant grew even happier. He invited them to a side room off the main hall with a smile before politely taking his leave to fetch the shopkeeper. Just as he left, a dainty maid came in and poured the two of them a cup of some oddly fragrant tea before silently withdrawing. With a trace of politeness, Han Li lifted the teacup and took a taste. But not long after, an eccentric middle-aged man with a long-whiskered mustache and beard had arrived. He walked in with a beaming smile, but after he discovered the depth of Crooked Soul's cultivation, he involuntarily revealed shock and hurriedly saluted Crooked Soul, saying, "I truly didn't expect that fellow Taoist had reached false core stage. My congratulations. I am the shopkeeper Cao Lu. I offer my best wishes for fellow Taoist in entering core formation." His solemn, respectful expression left Han Li stunned. His thoughts quickly churned for a moment before realizing that he was referring to Crooked Soul's near-peak Foundation establishment cultivation. Going along with the situation, Han Li willed Crooked Soul to say, "Fellow Taoist jests, how is core formation so easily reached? Actually, I've come to make preparations for this very matter. However, when I initially came to the Sky Capital Market, I truly didn't know where to find the ingredients I required: spirit, snow, water, and liquid heaven fire. I hope fellow Taoist Cao could give me some advice." Crooked Soul spoke with a very courteous tone, as the strange-looking middle-aged man was a mid-Foundation establishment cultivator. Shopkeeper Cao instantly replied, "He, that isn't a problem. Our 6 united palaces have mutual respect and sense of propriety. I'll get in touch with Jade Band Pavilion's fellow Taoist Ayang and immediately send them over should they have them." Without the slightest hesitation, he took out a sound transmission talisman and softly said a few words into it before it turned into a streak of red light and flew out the room. Following this, Shopkeeper Cao cordially chatted with Crooked Soul, casually asking about Crooked Soul's origins and affiliations. But Han Li couldn't possibly divulge such secrets to a stranger he just met. He merely had Crooked Soul vaguely state that he was a cultivator that had newly arrived at the island. Because he had unexpectedly ran into his martial nephew Han Li, he decided to stay on Stalwart Star Island for the time being. Shopkeeper Cao's smile grew even wider. His friendliness reached a level Han Li found difficult to tolerate. Just as doubts were stirring in Han Li's mind, a large azure-clothed man with a curled beard walked into the room. His face was a dark red and he had a lofty, burly body. He appeared extremely bold and powerful. "Fellow Taoist Cao, why do you suddenly want spirit, snow, water, and liquid heaven fire? Could it be someone wishes to form their core?" A large man suddenly walked into the room with a forthright smile. After looking at Han Li for a moment, he turned his attention to Crooked Soul. Han Li inwardly frowned. This person asked a question while clearly already knowing the answer. He was not straightforward and bold as his appearance had suggested. He was definitely a deep schemer. Han Li's heart trembled and became more vigilant of this person. Naturally, Han Li and Crooked Soul had calm expressions, and they even wore slight smiles. "He, fellow Taoist Aoyang, let me give you an introduction. This is fellow Taoist Crooked Soul. He just arrived at this island. This is his martial nephew Han Li, a resident of our island. Fellow Taoist Crooked Soul has reached false core stage and wishes to strive to form his core." Cao Lu pointed at Crooked Soul and Han Li, speaking with a beaming smile. Congratulations, fellow Taoist. If fellow Taoist succeeds in forming his core, our stalwart Star Sea will have another pillar of strength." The curly-bearded man surnamed Ayang spoke cordially with a wide grin. He suddenly appeared to have thought of something and patted the back of his head. He embarrassingly said, "Ah, my damn memory. I've forgotten about Crooked Soul's impatient need of spirit, snow, water, and liquid heaven fire. But please be at ease. I brought over enough for 2 people to form their cores." The large man with a curly mustache, fellow Taoist Ayang, took out 2 jade boxes shining with yellow light and placed them on the table in front of Han Li. These two boxes holding spiritual objects were carved out of earth attribute jade acquired from the deep sea. It can also be considered a strange treasure, but when compared with the price of what it contains, it is naturally incomparable. Although curly-bearded man's words seemed as if he didn't care, he seemed to hold some pride in them. "Then I truly must thank you." Crooked Soul calmly said his thanks before carefully opening the boxes. One of the boxes contained a clear, transparent liquid. Upon opening the box, a wondrous cold yin qi directly blew past Crooked Soul. In contrast, the other box contained a fiery, scarlet liquid that released a scorching air. After inspecting these items for a long while, Crooked Soul shut the lids of the boxes with a satisfied appearance. He raised his head and serenely asked, "How many spirit stones does fellow Taoist want in order to part with these items?" Although spirit snow water and liquid heaven fire weren't as rare as thousand-year spirit herbs, they were spiritual objects that were difficult to find. But as they were items that were needed to enter core formation, Han Li was determined to acquire them. Chapter 377, Pill Formulas and Demon Cores. The large, curly-bearded man waved his hand, speaking casually. "Although our 6 united palaces aren't part of the 4 Elements Merchant Union, we have quite a lot of prestige in the scattered star seas. These 2 items are rare, but they are beneath our notice. Please allow our 6 united palaces to present the spirit snow ice and liquid heaven fire to fellow Taoist Crooked Soul as our early congratulations for your core formation." Han Li didn't feel any excitement. Instead, he inwardly frowned, refraining from having Crooked Soul take them. "You would give such previous items as a gift. I'm not convinced there is such a great thing in this world. Since Crooked Soul is at what they call false core stage, could it be that they have hidden intentions for currying favor in such an excessive manner?" Han Li became increasingly cautious with that in mind. Crooked Soul then shook his head and sternly said, "That won't do. There is no reward without cost. These 2 items should be sold for what they're worth. I have the spirit stones for them. Or is there something that you two are too embarrassed to say?" After saying this, Crooked Soul revealed a mysterious smile. Seeing that Crooked Soul was so guarded against such a great gift, Cao Lu and the curly-bearded man couldn't help but give each other a mutual glance after a moment of astonishment. After meeting each other's gaze, Cao Lu dryly coughed and said, "It seems we've made fools of ourselves. Since fellow Taoist Crooked Soul understands, I will tell it as it is. Our 6 united palaces do have a few matters that require your assistance. These 2 spiritual items are a kindly advance. If this affair is concluded, our stores will give you a great award." Cao Lu spoke rather cordially, while the curly-bearded man revealed embarrassment. Han Li inwardly sneered and had Crooked Soul tactfully decline while wearing a faint smile. "I won't conceal this from you too. Currently, I am entirely focused on forming my core and have no inclination for any other affairs. I am truly sorry, but it would be best for you to find someone else." Crooked Soul didn't have any interest in listening to the matter and put a stop to the conversation. Cao Lu and the curly-bearded man didn't take offense at his response and revealed smooth smiles instead. Since fellow Taoist Crooked Soul's core formation occupies his mind, he should definitely lend a hand. After this matter is concluded, our 6 united palaces will reward you with a dustfall pill. It is of great assistance towards core formation and will certainly increase the odds of successfully forming your core," the curly-bearded man said with a chuckle. "Dustfall pill," Crooked Soul muttered to himself with slight surprise. Cao Lu replaced his smile with a solemn expression and said, "That's right. This matter requires 6 cultivators at false core stage, and we just need 1 more. Fellow Taoist's arrival is extremely timely. All of the cultivators who participate will be given a dustfall pill as payment." The dustfall pill was an item of great renown in the scattered star seas. However, Han Li, who had remained in isolation since initially arriving on the island, had no idea how wondrous the pill was rumored to be. After muttering to himself for a moment, Crooked Soul solemnly asked, "Could you tell me the concrete details of the task I am to assist with before making my decision?" "Of course we can. It isn't a complicated matter. It is just that our stores have discovered a grade 6 demon beast and wish to acquire its demon core. As a result, we thought to invite some outsiders to assist in the hunt." Cao Lu chuckled and played it down. "Grade 6 demon beast," Crooked Soul bitterly smiled. Han Li had nearly stood up to loudly curse at them. The grade 4 mantis demon beast had nearly claimed his life, and now they wanted to fight a grade 6 demon beast. Did they want to send these cultivators to their deaths? Having seen Crooked Soul's doubtful expression, the curly-bearded man quickly gave an explanation. Please be at ease. Our stores have come up with a complete plan which significantly lowers the danger. Apart from having 2 of our store's core formation elders act, we will also place down a 6 flowing ripples formation. 6 false core formation cultivators will be enough to maintain the formation. A 6 flowing ripples formation. Han Li felt that the name of that formation sounded quite familiar, as if he had heard it before in formation spell insights that Xin Ryan had previously given to him. Han Li then willed Crooked Soul to delay his decision. Because of the importance of this matter, please give me 2 days to consider. Will it be acceptable if I give you my answer then? Crooked Soul's vague words left Cao Lu stunned, but he soon agreed with a wide smile. But when Han Li and Crooked Soul left, Cao Lu and the large, curly-bearded man had them take the spirit snow water and liquid heaven fire along with them. With a few polite words, they said that even if Crooked Soul later refused, it wouldn't matter, and that they were to be treated solely as gifts. Crooked Soul faintly smiled in response to his coaxing words, but he didn't refuse, taking the jade boxes with him. After a few polite words, he then left the palace pavilion with Han Li. After leaving the white water pavilion, Han Li turned around to take a look at the pavilion. He lightly shook his head before finding his way out of the plaza. Since these 6 palace pavilions formed a single group, Han Li naturally wouldn't visit the other stores to haggle over any prices. After all, he had already taken the items they had given him for free. As a result, he bluntly intended to visit the surrounding shops for a few other items he wished to acquire. Apart from the spirit snow water and liquid heaven fire for core formation, he also wanted to purchase a few materials to create grade 2 puppets. Although he had already grown the most important material, the several hundred-year-old ironwood, he still needed to buy large quantities of secondary materials such as source iron and cloud essence stone. He also needed a few materials to refine the spirit feed pill. After refining these pills, he would be able to formally train the white spiders. With these thoughts in mind, Han Li entered a small store with miscellaneous goods, managing to buy a majority of what he needed. The rest of the items he required were rarer and would require visiting several other stores to acquire them. As he was browsing through the many stores, he mostly focused on the stores that sold ancient records of medicine pills and cultivation arts. After all, he had nearly used all of his pill formulas and wished to acquire 1 or 2 more. As for cultivation arts, although their prices were unreasonably high, they would provide him with an explanation of the types of cultivation arts used in the scattered star seas. After completing a round trip, Han Li felt amazement. While having Crooked Soul wait outside, he entered a medicine pill shop, asking if they had any Foundation Establishment stage pill formulas for sale. The shop assistant unexpectedly showed him several tens of pill formulas, causing Han Li to nearly bite his tongue in shock. Although he couldn't bring himself to believe it, he still carefully examined the pill formulas, and the outcome was complete shock. Regardless of whether the pill formulas used rare or common materials, they all required demon beast cores instead of spiritual herbs. The rarer medicine pills even required the inner core of 6th and 7th grade demon beasts. While these pill formulas also required spiritual herbs that were several hundreds of years old, the spiritual herbs used in the formulas were only auxiliary ingredients. They could be replaced with other spiritual herbs instead. As such, Han Li acquired a thick stack of pill formulas and remained dumbfounded for a long while. Under the baffled gaze of the store assistant, he had casually bought several usable formulas at a low price and walked out in a daze. A short moment later, he felt somewhat unsatisfied and ran over to several other medicinal pill shops, discovering that apart from low-grade qi condensation pill formulas, all other pill formulas required demon beast cores. Finally, Han Li couldn't help but make a careful inquiry to a shopkeeper about whether there were any high-grade pill formulas that didn't require demon beast cores. The shopkeeper looked at Han Li as if he were an idiot for a long while before saying, "What else would you use to refine a high-grade medicine pill, if not a demon core beast?" Han Li then dejectedly walked out of the store and completely gave up on the matter. It seems that the pill Tao of the scattered star seas followed a different path than that of the heavenly south region. They used the cores of demon beasts as the central ingredient of medicinal pills rather than spiritual herbs. After some careful thought, Han Li found this to be quite reasonable. The sea was vast and without end, containing a countless number of demon beasts. With their ancestors incapable of causing a complete extinction of resources, the circumstances in the scattered star seas was far better than that of the heavenly south region. It seems that these pill formulas had been passed down since ancient times. As Han Li was thinking while standing on the remote corner of some road, he carefully looked through his collection of recently purchased pill formulas for one, with the name of Foundation Establishment Pill. The pill formula was mostly the same as the one as Han Li had remembered. However, the heavenly spiritual medicines that were found only in the blood-red forbidden area were instead replaced with grade 5 demon cores. When Han Li saw this, he put away the pill formulas and folded his arms before entering deep contemplation. Chapter 378, Going Out to Sea 1. After a long while, Han Li finally awoke from his contemplations with a plan in mind. Nothing appearing out of the ordinary, he proceeded to visit the shops selling ancient records of cultivation techniques. This trip didn't result in any surprises. He was quite familiar with the cultivation arts, and 5-element techniques being sold as they weren't much different from those in the heavenly south region. Though it should be said that the water attribute magic techniques were more plentiful, there were even a few new techniques that he hadn't heard of before. Han Li bought these new magic techniques along with a book he accidentally found, Pill Dao Evaluations. The reason he bought this book was because it contained an expert's description and commentary of the dustful pill. Han Li intended to carefully study it before coming to a decision about the 6 United Palaces request. With no interest in buying anything else, Han Li and Crooked Soul left the Sky Capital Market along with the city. Not long after they left Stalwart Star City, Han Li and Crooked Soul took to the skies and flew toward the Gu clan estate. About half a day later, Han Li gazed at the somewhat familiar scene of the Gu clan estate's earthen walls. But instead of immediately descending towards the Gu clan estate, he decided to first land at the small hilltop to the side of the estate and take a look at the small wooden house he had constructed. The small wooden house still stood in its original location. However, it was clear that it had greatly aged, and some areas had blackened from rot. When Han Li saw this, he lightly sighed before opening the door and entering the house. Han Li was surprised. The room wasn't covered in a layer of dust, nor was there the rotting scent he had expected. Instead, the room was swept clean. The table, chair, and bed didn't have a single speck of dust. There was even a pot of blue flowers on the wooden table. Han Li was at a loss for a moment, but he couldn't stop himself from breaking out into laughter. It seems the Gu clan had put quite some thought into this. Han Li stroked his nose as he muttered to himself. Afterwards, Han Li left the wooden house without any feelings of attachment and left Crooked Soul on the hilltop, slowly walking towards the Gu clan estate by himself. Han Li had no intention of hurriedly flying towards the Gu clan. Although the Gu clan's spell formation posed no problem to him, the Gu clan master could be considered an old friend. Naturally, it'd be better to be polite. But when Han Li walked in front of the Gu clan's gate, 2 imposingly strong gate guards had noticed him. One of them suspiciously asked, "Who are you? What brings you to our Gu clan?" Han Li smiled and spoke in a soft voice. "Tell your clan's master that an old friend surnamed Han has come. Our clan's lord doesn't see outsiders." "Wait, Han. Could it be that you are Immortal Master Han?" The large man had initially rejected him, but after sizing up Han Li, he suddenly revealed doubt. "You know of me?" Han Li made a slight frown. "So it really is Immortal Han. Please wait for a moment, Immortal Master. I will send a report to the Manor Lord." The large man spoke no further and ran towards the manor. Han Li expressionlessly looked towards the manor and spoke no further. Not long after, a large group of people left the manor. The old man that was leading them smiled widely upon seeing Han Li and loudly shouted, "Immortal Han, you've finally returned. I've waited for quite a few years." Afterwards, the old man hastily walked forward to salute Han Li. The others followed suit, each respectfully saluting Han Li. Han Li attentively gazed at the old man's familiar face. This was definitely the Gu clan master, but his hair was now white and his face was decrepit. "Mr. Gu, I trust that you've been well," Han Li asked with a relaxed expression. Under Master Gu's respectful welcome, Han Li entered a huge residence at the center of the Gu estate. After entering a room, Master Gu took the initiative to hand over a large sack of spirit stones to Han Li without waiting for him to say anything. In addition, he gave Han Li a cordial introduction to a few of the young children of the Gu clan. He particularly made an effort to introduce his eldest son, a 30-year-old youth named Gu Kai. How could Han Li not see what the Gu clan master intended? The Gu clan master knew that the end of his life was drawing near, and he wished for Han Li to continue providing some assistance to his clan after his passing. Han Li faintly smiled and said some casual promises for the sake of their past friendship. The Gu clan master felt great joy and immediately called for a feast on behalf of Han Li. However, Han Li tactfully declined. Following, Han Li had a chat with the Gu clan master before swiftly departing from the Gu clan estate. After leaving, Han Li fetched Crooked Soul from the hilltop and flew towards a small, nearby village. Han Li quickly found an inn and spent the night studying the Pill Dao evaluations without any sleep. On the next day, Han Li had a general understanding about the medicine pills of the scattered star seas. As for the Dustfall pill, he had examined its description several times. In accordance to the book, the Dustfall pill not only required the cores of several uncommon demon beasts, but it also required a large amount of rarely seen spiritual herbs to refine. It was an undoubtedly precious item. The pill really does have the wondrous effect of increasing the odds of core formation. Although the increased odds couldn't be considered to be much, and it can only be taken during the formation of one's core, it is seen as a treasure to cultivators on the verge of core formation. To cultivators wishing to form their core, any items capable of raising their odds of success by even a single % were greatly coveted, but extremely rare. Nevertheless, Han Li understood that since the 6 palaces were offering this rare medicine pill as payment, the task wouldn't be nearly as easy as maintaining a formation. There would certainly be a large amount of danger if he went, and only the heavens would know what troubles he would encounter. However, Han Li truly thirsted for this Dustfall pill. After all, both he and Crooked Soul were soon facing core formation. Leaving his own poor odds aside, Crooked Soul's Fiend Core was said to have a 1/3 chance of core formation. As the probability of failure was so high, he was unable to feel at ease. He needed to acquire the Dustfall pill. After sinking into bitter contemplation for a long while, he eventually came to the decision to face the unknown danger. After all, both he and Crooked Soul were late Foundation establishment cultivators. If any danger arose, he should be able to protect himself without problem. In addition, it appeared that the 6 United Palaces held a significant amount of power. Forming a connection to them now should prove to be rather useful while in the scattered star seas. However, he must first make some discreet inquiries about the reputation of the 6 United Palaces. If relations were to turn sour immediately after the matter is concluded, he'd greatly suffer. Having come to decision, Han Li brought Crooked Soul back to Stalwart Star City. Half a month later, an extremely huge ship sailed into the port of Stalwart Star Island. After a short moment, 2 streaks of light, one white and one blue, shot towards the boat from a faraway place and boarded it without any hesitation. After the light faded away, 3 people appeared on board the ship: a lofty and strong but ugly man, a youth with a common appearance, and an odd middle-aged man with an aged appearance. A wide-eyed man with thick eyebrows walked out to respectfully greet the robust man and youth. "Welcome to our ship, Immortal Masters. I am the ship's captain, Luo Zheng. The other Immortal Masters are on already board. I will now bring everyone to the general location of the demon beast." The Immortal Masters he addressed were naturally Crooked Soul and Han Li. As for the middle-aged man, he was the shopkeeper of the White Water Pavilion, Cao Lu. "Fellow Taoist Crooked Soul, take care. I must return to take care of a few matters." After exchanging a few polite words, Cao Lu flew off. The thick-browed man lowered his head before saying, "Please come in, we've already prepared rooms for you. The ship will soon depart." Han Li gazed at the ship as he silently entered its hull with Crooked Soul. As for Luo Zheng, he followed right behind them. At this moment, the huge ship slowly began to move once more. Upon entering the hull of the ship, Han Li was surprised by what he saw. It wasn't at all like the small passageway Han Li had imagined. Instead, there was a luxurious hall that spanned over 40 meters. Embroidered carpet covered the hall's floor, and a long sandalwood table embedded with gold and silver was at the center of the room. There were over a dozen chairs around it, occupied by several people chatting. Once Han Li and Crooked Soul entered, several icy, stern gazes swept past them. Their gazes merely swept past Han Li before focusing their eyes on Crooked Soul. Crooked Soul blurred and covered Han Li's front. He then expressionlessly said, "I am Crooked Soul. This is my martial nephew Han Li. What are you fellow Taoists called?" Chapter 379, Going Out to Sea 2. A middle-aged woman that appeared to be about 40 years old stood up and spoke with a beaming smile. "Welcome, fellow Taoist crooked soul. I am the Six United Palaces, Xianxia. I will be in charge of controlling the formation that everyone will be maintaining." Although this woman couldn't be said to be gorgeous, she still had hints of beauty. "My greetings, fellow Taoist Feng." Crooked Soul spoke neither humbly nor arrogantly and brought Han Li towards the table. The many unfamiliar cultivators in the hall had already entered Han Li's view. A middle-aged Confucian scholar with an ordinary appearance, a charming young woman that appeared about 20 years old, an old man with ash-colored eyes, a youth covered in glowing red light. With the addition of Feng Sanyang, there were exactly 5 people. The charming young woman was an early Foundation establishment cultivator, however, and sat closely together with the Confucian scholar. From their intimate appearance, it seemed they were Tao companions. As Han Li was pondering, Feng Sanyang started talking with a charming smile. "Fellow Taoist Crooked has arrived just in time. I was just talking about the transformations of the 6 flowing ripples formation. If we become more familiar with the formation in advance, the matter will definitely proceed much more smoothly when the time comes. But before then, I must introduce fellow Taoist Crooked Soul to you all." Feng Sanyang was clearly very adept at dealing with others, and with only few words, she reduced the distance between everyone in the hall. These 2 were sent by Tail Star Island's island master, Senior Zhan Tai. This is his brilliant disciple, fellow Taoist Mao, and his Tao companion, fellow Taoist Zhu. Feng Sanyang first introduced the middle-aged Confucian scholar and the young woman to Han Li. After coldly glancing at Han Li, the middle-aged Confucian scholar arrogantly said, "Crooked Soul, a cultivator from stalwart Star Island. I know of many people, but why is it that I've never heard of your esteemed self?" For some unknown reason, this middle-aged Confucian scholar found Crooked Soul displeasing to the eye and shot an insulting statement at him. Feng Sanyang's beaming expression involuntarily dropped for a moment before recovering. "I wasn't originally a stalwart Star Island cultivator. It was only recently that I arrived the island to visit my martial nephew Han Li, so there is nothing odd in not knowing my name. Moreover, this is the first time I've ever heard your name as well." Crooked Soul calmly mocked in return. "You?" The middle-aged Confucian scholar appeared furious. Just as his face darkened and he was about to say something, Feng Sanyang quickly interrupted and changed the subject. "I'll now introduce this elder, Gold Turtle Island's hidden cultivator, fellow Taoist Qing Suenzi. Although few know of him, there are few Foundation establishment cultivators that can match his wood element magic techniques. As for fellow Taoist Yan, he is even more impressive. With his hidden fire constitution, he managed to cultivate his pure Yang Trufier to perfection by himself. Fellow Taoist Qing, fellow Taoist Yan." Han Li nodded his head towards the old man and the youth. Although the 2 were also late Foundation establishment, Han Li felt a far deeper pressure from them than the middle-aged Confucian scholar. As their cultivation was by no means shallow, Han Li was unwilling to casually slight them. "Hello, fellow Taoist Crooked Soul. I send you my regards." The 2 weren't high-handed and gave Crooked Soul a faint smile. This caused the middle-aged Confucian scholar to feel even more uneasy. As such, without waiting for Feng Sanyang to speak further, he suddenly stood and said with a wooden expression, "I am going to return to my room and meditate. I'll leave the matter of the formation spell for later." Then, with a wave of his sleeve, he turned around and left the hall. The young woman glanced apologetically at the others before following after him. "Humph, what right does he have to be arrogant? The fact that he has an island lord for a master." The youth surnamed Yan, whose body shined with red light, spoke with slight anger. The old man's and Feng Sanyang's expression slightly shifted. While the old man's face became expressionless immediately after, Feng Sanyang called for Crooked Soul to sit down with a wide smile, as if wanting to brush away the matter with the Confucian scholar. "Don't we need 6 people? Fellow Taoist Zhu doesn't appear to have the cultivation required to maintain the formation," Crooked Soul calmly asked, sitting down without any further decorum. Feng Sanyang smiled before giving an explanation. "There is still Shiftcree Island's fellow Taoist Du. However, he is currently cultivating a ferocious technique and hasn't left his room in the past few days." "Oh, so it was like that." Crooked Soul nodded his head and didn't say anything further. But as Feng Sanyang was quite curious about Crooked Soul, she would occasionally ask him a few irrelevant questions. Han Li, who stood behind Crooked Soul, found this somewhat surprising as he didn't know what the woman intended. When she asked whether or not Crooked Soul comprehended the 6 flowing ripples magic formation, Han Li willed Crooked Soul to reply that he did not. The woman smiled, stating that neither did the others. Then she began to give the 3 present cultivators an explanation of its wondrous intricacies. It was truly surprising. Feng Sanyang was a rarely seen formation spell expert. Although the middle-aged Confucian scholar had a problem with the others, he eventually returned to the main hall the next day to hear about the important aspects for maintaining the formation. After all, the 6 United Palaces had invited him to come, and it would be unbecoming for him to shirk his responsibilities. 3 days later, the remaining cultivator ended his seclusion in his room, allowing Han Li to finally see him. He was a bulky, 7-foot-tall man with a fierce-looking face. Although his appearance seemed violent, he was an outspoken and frank person that quickly formed a close relationship with the others. With their final member present, Han Li and company finished listening to Feng Sanyang's explanation on the profound intricacies of the spell formation. Afterwards, their ship would often stop, and they would fly around the nearby seas, continuously practicing the shifting forms of the 6 flowing ripples formation. This way, they would succeed on their first attempt to capture the demon beast when the time came. Everyone was satisfied with this arrangement. As such, the ship naturally slowed down, but the 6 United Palaces didn't seem impatient at all. Even with the constant stops, Feng Sanyang maintained her beaming smile and didn't show the slightest impatience. When the formation spell transformations were finally practiced to perfection, Feng Sanyang no longer delayed their journey and had the ship continue on at full speed. 1 month later, the ship arrived at a nameless, desolate island. Led by Feng Sanyang, Han Li and company descended from the ship. Just as they stepped onto the small island, a blinding golden light flew down from the sky, and several people were suddenly hovering above them. Once the light faded away, an old man whose face had a dim, golden sheen expressionlessly glanced at them. This person lacked any noticeable magic power fluctuations, despite obviously not being immortal. It seemed he was able to restrain his unfathomably deep magic power with ease. The appearance of such an expert caused Han Li's heart to tremble. Feng Sanyang stepped forward without hesitation and deeply bowed to the old man, and spoke with an expression of respect. Subordinate Feng Sanyang pays her respects to Elder Miao. At that moment, Han Li and the others standing behind her paid their respects as well. They obviously couldn't afford to slight a core formation cultivator. With a calm expression, the old man slowly said, "There is no need to be so polite. Feng Sanyang, you did quite well. You've managed to bring these assistants very quickly. Are they familiar with the formation spell drills? The demonic beast we're dealing with is quite troublesome, and we cannot be careless." "Elder, be at ease. Everyone has already fully mastered the many variations of the 6 flowing ripples formation. We will definitely be able to trap the beast." Feng Sanyang's voice brimmed with confidence. Elder Miao swept his gaze over the Foundation establishment cultivators. He then said in a friendly manner, "Good. Fellow Taoists, our 6 United Palaces require your assistance. So long as you properly exert yourself, we will treat you fairly without a doubt." Without waiting for the others to speak, the middle-aged Confucian scholar rushed to speak with an ingratiating smile. "Be at ease, senior. We will definitely try our best." Although the others revealed odd expressions upon seeing the Confucian scholar's flattery, they could only express their mutual agreement. Satisfied with their responses, Elder Miao nodded his head and said, "We've already placed down the formation several days ago. You will only have to maintain it. As for Elder Gu, he is in the nearby seas chasing after the demon beast, and I will be joining him after this. I reckon by tomorrow morning, we will be able to draw the beast into the formation, and you all will be able to display your skill. You should rest on the island until then." Elder Miao then turned into a streak of gold light and flew into the sky, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Feng Sanyang turned her head over, speaking with a solemn voice, "Fellow Taoists, you've heard Elder Miao. Let's rest for the day and properly prepare ourselves for the hard battle coming tomorrow." The others naturally didn't contest this and nodded their heads. But at this moment, Qing Suenzi, who seldom spoke on the journey, suddenly said with a stiff voice, "Fellow Taoist Feng, we've all asked what kind of demon beast we would be dealing with along the way. In the end, you never clearly answered us. But now that we will act tomorrow, will you finally give us a clear answer?" The old man's question stirred the hearts of the others, bringing all of their questioning gazes upon Feng Sanyang. This demon beast was apparently terrible and rarely seen, even requiring great efforts and long planning from the 6 United Palaces. This definitely wasn't some ordinary grade 6 demon beast. Chapter 380, Infant Carp Beast. When Feng Sanyang heard this, she revealed a bitter smile. She dragged the hair on her forehead to one side and slowly said, "Fellow Taoists, it wasn't that I was unwilling to state the facts. I was under orders to not divulge this information until we arrived on the island. Now that we've arrived, I have no restrictions in telling you all. The foe that our united 6 palaces wish to battle is an infant carp beast. That is why we had to be a bit careful." Infant carp beast. When Qing Xuanzi heard this, he couldn't help but shout out in shock. Han Li detachedly gazed on. Although he didn't know what sort of demon beast they were facing, judging by the pale expressions of the others, it was by no means some trifling beast. "I don't blame your palaces for being this careful. If it really is this demon beast, it was right to be careful. If other powers were to know of this, who knows how much of a disturbance would be brought about." Qing Xuanzi muttered in disbelief. Han Li's heart stirred upon hearing him. The youth surnamed Yan, and the large bald man's expressions continuously shifted as their hearts were in turmoil. Only the middle-aged Confucian scholar with an unsightly expression coldly spoke to Feng Sanyang. "Your 6 united palaces have overreached themselves. Everyone knows that the infant carp beast is an innate water demon beast with formidable water-type divine abilities. If it were grade 6, it'd be a match for common grade 7 demon beasts. By claiming it to be a grade 6 beast when you were asking for our assistance, were you deliberately trying to take advantage of us?" The middle-aged Confucian scholar asked. Qing Xuanzi and the others eventually recovered from their shock, all revealing their displeasure. Although they were all rogue cultivators, those that walked the road less traveled, they didn't dare to rashly offend the 6 united palaces. They all wordlessly stared at Feng Sanyang, waiting for an answer. Feng Sanyang's face darkened and she replied without a trace of politeness, "Fellow Taoist Mao, you speak wrongly. Our 6 united palaces did not deceive you. Although the infant carp beast is a bit difficult, it is a genuine grade 6 demon beast. How could you say we called a grade 7 demon beast a grade 6 demon beast? Besides, since our palaces offered a reward as precious as the Dustfall pill, you should have understood that you weren't going to deal with a common grade 6 beast. Otherwise, our palaces would be operating at a loss." The middle-aged Confucian scholar was left dumbstruck for a long while, and Han Li inwardly frowned. Although the woman's outspoken words held reason, he still felt very uncomfortable and couldn't help but glance at the others. The other 3 appeared to have the same attitude as Han Li and revealed slight displeasure. Then Feng Sanyang suddenly flashed Crooked Soul a smile and said, "Naturally, our palace acted in this manner to ensure that the existence of the infant carp beast is kept hidden. As a result, arrangements were made before we came here. In addition to the Dustfall pill you will receive after this matter is concluded, you will all be paid in advance of 1,000 spirit stones as compensation for keeping the matter secret. Is this to your satisfaction?" Everyone's resentment had slowly faded away, and they each nodded their heads in agreement. The middle-aged man still seemed somewhat unsatisfied, but his young, beautiful Tao companion then whispered something into his ear. His expression changed, and he kept silent. Soon after, everyone went off in their own direction on the island and found a quiet location to meditate and rest. Han Li and Crooked Soul found a huge reef near the ocean shore and sat down cross-legged while facing each other. Under Han Li's meticulous commands, Crooked Soul quickly entered a state of strength honing. As for Han Li, he slowly closed his eyes, wishing to meditate. But after the time it took to make a cup of tea, Han Li opened his eyes with a frown. He then looked at the surging waves while lost in thought. For some unknown reason, he felt somewhat ill at ease, as if something incredible was about to occur. After pondering in restless apprehension for a long while, he helplessly smiled as he was unable to single out the cause. He was still quite nervous. Although a spirited rest was normally easy to come by, he would be assisting 2 core formation cultivators with the 6 flowing ripples formation tomorrow. Although the demon beast seemed quite unordinary, a demon beast was still a demon beast. Facing against cultivators of superior strength, how could it possibly prevail? They shouldn't have any problem taking it down. After calming himself down with a few comforting words, Han Li attempted to forcefully enter meditation. But after a while, his heart still felt heavy, and he was unable to get into the mood. Han Li sighed and stood up. It seemed that unless he did something, he wouldn't feel at ease. Han Li helplessly looked around and released his spiritual sense. Fortunately, there was nobody around. Han Li quickly patted his storage pouch and took out over a dozen sparkling formation flags and 6 formation plates. the formation setup tool set for the Jade Water Azure Armor formation. Although this formation couldn't be compared to the 5 elements reversal formation or the 6 flowing ripples formation, it was still far stronger than common magic formations. In addition, it was extremely simple to set up due to its tools. Hanli called out to Crooked Soul without the slightest hesitation and had him use the reef as the formation center, setting up the rest of the formation flags and discs within 100 meters of it. As he watched Crooked Soul placing down the flags and burying the formation discs, Hanli felt his anxiety gradually dissipate. He couldn't help but make a slanted smile and self-mockingly say, "It seems I am still quite fearful of death." The next day before the sunrise, Feng Sanyang and the others gathered together, flying over 5 kilometers to sea. At this same moment, in the waters 500 kilometers away, a streak of gold light and a streak of yellow light were quickly flying in the direction of the nameless small island. A kilometer behind them, there was a large white mist spanning about 400 meters chasing after them at the same speed, while faintly releasing an infant's cry. Anybody who heard the miserable wail would feel their blood run cold. "Elder Meow, should I send a flying sword over to them and see if they're prepared?" A deep voice suddenly came from the rushing yellow light. "Sure," Elder Meow agreed without hesitation. His body blurred and reappeared at the center of the yellow light. At the same time, the golden light enveloping him turned into a golden rainbow and disappeared in an instant. The huge white mist chasing after them appeared upset by this, and the infant's weeping became even more intense. The sound gradually changed to that of thunder and became increasingly deafening. "Not good. The beast is going to use divine waterstar thunder. Elder Brother Goo, please hurry." Elder Meow, now enveloped by the yellow light, shouted out as if he were greatly fearful of the sounds of thunder from behind them. "Be at ease. My immemorial bowl isn't slow in the slightest." Just as the deep voice said this, the yellow light sped up and greatly increased the distance between them and the white mist in an instant. However, the white mist seemed unwilling to give up. With sounds of wailing and thunder, it also sped up, cutting through the seawater and spreading huge white waves across the ocean as far as the eye could see. Crooked Soul and company had already taken their positions at the formation's front, each holding a large blue flag in their hand. The banner was about 6 meters long and emitted threads of dazzling blue radiance. The 6 late Foundation establishment cultivators wore solemn expressions and were separated by over 400 meters as they floated above the sea on magic tools, forming a hollow semicircle. Hanli stood behind Crooked Soul with a detached gaze. As for the middle-aged Confucian scholar's Tao companion, she stood at his side with a concerned expression. A short moment later, a streak of golden light suddenly cleaved through the sky and arrived in Feng Sanyang's hand, drawing the attention of the others. "Everyone on guard. The infant carp beast is about to come. Once the beast enters the formation, immediately block off the entrance of the formation." Feng Sanyang received the message and loudly shouted to the others with a solemn expression. Afterwards, the golden light flew away and disappeared off into the sky. Hanli's heart tensed, and he attentively stared in the direction that the golden light flew off into. The others also wore taut expressions, as if they were anticipating the storm that was about to come. After an unknown amount of time passed, they heard faint rolls of thunder in the distance that soon grew increasingly louder. They eventually spotted a streak of yellow and a streak of golden light flying towards them at the speed of lightning. A huge white mist followed behind them as if it were closely pursuing them. "That's the infant carp beast." Although Hanli could clearly see a huge white mist behind the streaks, he couldn't imagine the sinister appearance of the demon beast concealed within. Chapter 381. Rare Treasures Conquer the Demon. Initiate the spell formation. Feng Sanyang loudly yelled as she waved the blue banner in her hands, causing blue circular ripples to suddenly flow from the banner. The others followed suit, silently waving their formation flags. In an instant, a blue brilliance enveloped all of them. After several flashes of light, they all disappeared without a trace. From a distance, only an empty sea could be seen where they once were. A moment later, 2 streaks of light flew past this area without any intention of slowing down, as if they were truly fleeing for their lives. The white mist behind them closely followed after them without a single shred of doubt. As soon as the white mist flew into range of the magic formation, it was surrounded by a drizzle of blue radiance, and a huge barrier of blue light appeared out of nowhere, trapping it within. At this moment, Feng Sanyang and the others all appeared around the barrier. They all had their flags lifted high and pointed at the light barrier, shooting out blue light beams with the thickness of a bowl. As the huge light barrier absorbed the beams, its shine became increasingly brighter and its color became deeper. After this occurred, the yellow and golden streaks of light immediately flew to above the light barrier. The light then faded away to reveal Elder Meow and burly man with long, messy hair. Good, well done. Next, you must withstand the beast's counterattack and allow us to use this opportunity to take it out with our rare treasures. Elder Meow shouted out with a joyful expression. After a mutual glance with Elder Goo, the two each reached for their chest and took out a pair of ancient, worn copper longspears. Other than their dull, shineless tips, there was nothing else of note. The two core formation elders of the 6 united palaces grew solemn and started muttering to themselves. The long spears then floated away from their grasps and released a yellow glow that gradually grew brighter. At that moment, the infant carp beast seemed to realize it was trapped. After a series of mournful infant cries, the huge, 300-meter-wide white mist suddenly shrank back towards its center. In the blink of an eye, it shrank to about 40 meters, forming a milky white barrier of mist. At the same time, thunderous wails came from the mist and momentously turned into a single cry, deafening the cultivators surrounding the formation and causing them to feel alarmed. After the infant's wails suddenly stopped, countless fist-sized spheres of blue light shot out from the mist, launching an overbearing assault against the blue light barrier. The fierce momentum of the attack caused everyone's heart to skip a beat. When the light spheres were 30 meters away from the barrier, they released shining azure clouds. A fraction of the light spheres flashed within their clouds and faded away, only to appear again above the white mist. Afterwards, it struck down. A portion of these attacks had actually returned, dodging away from the formation spell. However, the light spheres were truly great in number, and a majority of them managed to strike the blue barrier. Suddenly, both the blue light barrier and the white mist violently erupted with white radiance, but the white mist's light disappeared with a single flash. As for the light barrier, its walls were shaking. The blue and white light flickered, interweaving with one another as if the light barrier were about to collapse. Everyone quickly use more magic power. This is one of the infant carp beast's killing moves, Divine Waterstar Thunder. We only have to persist for a few minutes more. Feng Sanyang shouted out with a flustered expression. She then took the initiative to say an incantation and spurted out some blood essence towards the banner in her hand. Its blue light flourished, releasing a light beam several times thicker than its original, which immediately steadied the light barrier. When the others saw this, they could only perform their own techniques to draw the entirety of their body's magic power to forcefully support the formation. Han Li was somewhat surprised. He hadn't expected that the infant carp beast would so quickly fight with all its might. This demon beast's ferociousness was truly beyond reason. Up above the magic formation, the two core formation cultivators' copper spears began a strange transformation. As they were chanting a mysterious incantation with solemn expressions, the yellow light emitted from the spears grew larger inch by inch, and the long spears started to point down towards the center of the white mist. The infant carp beast within the white mist seemed to sense the danger that was above it and suddenly released a deafening cry. The white mist gradually rotated at increasingly faster speeds. After a short moment, it had formed a huge whirlwind and swept up a huge torrent of water. The tempest also carried bits of blue radiance, extremely dangerous units of divine waterstar thunder. Qing Suenzi and company became aghast at the sight and couldn't help but nervously glance at Feng Sanyang. However, she appeared equivalently terrified and didn't seem to know what astonishing magic technique the infant carp beast had used. Han Li's expression became gloomy as he silently ordered Crooked Soul to send the entirety of his magic power into the formation. Although he didn't know what divine ability the infant carp beast had used, it appeared that the attack would free the demon beast. With that in mind, Han Li couldn't help but look towards the sky and saw that the two long spears had already become about 30 meters long, faintly releasing a clear, pleasant ring. The two core formation elders then formed a strange hand incantation while rigidly staring at the huge spears. Their initial incantation still continued on as their expressions became intense and their foreheads were faintly laden with sweat. As the bewildering cries of the beast continued, the huge, white-blue tempest suddenly collided against the light barrier like an overbearing strike of lightning. As it was over 100 meters tall, it carried an astonishing pressure. The faces of the middle-aged Confucian scholar and the young woman by his side paled as if they were drained of blood. As the direction of this fearsome attack was towards his corner of the formation, he couldn't help but inwardly complain without end. He helplessly gritted his teeth and enveloped his body in a dazzling barrier interwoven with both yellow and blue radiance. Afterwards, he rigidly held onto the formation flag and poured the entirety of his spiritual power into the flagpole, causing the flag to shoot out a light beam that was many times thicker than before. Just as this happened, the huge tempest struck the barrier, losing its momentum and seeming to have no effect. Suddenly, sounds of thunder, cries, and rupture suddenly rang out. The light barrier only managed to endure for a short moment before collapsing amongst the beast's dreadful wails. Crooked Soul and the other cultivators maintaining the formation all displayed shock and spit out a mouthful of blood. When the middle-aged Confucian scholar had spit out blood, his Tao companion wordlessly dragged him off, escaping to an area about 100 meters away. Just as the great formation ruptured and the Foundation establishment cultivators paled, a furious shout echoed from the skies, "Evil beast, accept your death." Immediately after this was spoken, two huge yellow streaks of light struck down like bolts of lightning into the huge tempest. With a loud, mournful infant's wail, the sea abruptly became deathly quiet, and the mist gradually dispersed to reveal the true body of the infant carp beast. As for the two copper spears, they had returned to their original form, and their flashes of yellow light reflected against the sea as they were nailed into the beast's body. Han Li quickly had Crooked Soul take out a mid-grade spirit stone and recover his magic power without delay as he brought his attention to down below. The infant carp beast appeared extremely strange. It had the head of a young infant with the body and tail of a blue carp. There were also 4 smooth, white human arms growing from its lower body, as well as 2 huge fins that seemed to act as wings. But what was most strange was that its 4 arms each held a distinct item: a huge crab turtle, a meter-long stick of coral, a white, egg-sized pearl, and a silver, shield-like clamshell. From a single glance at the items' shining appearance, one could tell they were precious items. The beast's infant head appeared to have an expression of anguish as if it were still screaming. Once Han Li saw the lines of sharp teeth in its open mouth, he felt aghast. As for its 3-meter-long carp body, it continuously flailed about, wanting to escape from the 2 copper spears that pierced it. However, the 2 copper spears seemed to be innately baneful to demon beasts. Regardless of how much it struggled, the spears remained rigidly nailed into the still water. It seemed almost as if they were eating away at the beast. The 2 core formation elders that threw the copper spears appeared just as exhausted as Han Li and the others. It was obvious that releasing these 2 rare treasures had somewhat damaged their origin chi. However, they still flew over with an expression of intense ecstasy. The other Foundation establishment cultivators couldn't help but stare at the infant carp beast with greed. But when they spotted Feng Sanyang eyeing them like a tiger watching its prey, they completely relinquished any intentions of greed, swallowing their mouthfuls of saliva and glancing at the 2 spears that extinguished the beast. 2 core formation cultivators excitedly flew over, but when they were only about 100 meters away from the infant carp beast, an evil wind that was black as ink suddenly blew from underneath the demon beast. A kilometer of the sea surface condensed into a shining white ball of ice with the beast at its center, before soaring towards the sky and pouncing downward onto the core formation cultivators. This abrupt and unexpected event left everyone stunned. Chapter 382, Wu Chu. Profound Devil Yin Qi. The core formation elders seemed to have recognized this black aura and shouted out in alarm. They quickly flew away as if they had seen a venomous scorpion. The black aura didn't pursue them and sank back into the ocean like a hissing snake, condensing into a black whirlwind at the side of the ice sphere containing the infant carp beast. The black wind gradually stopped to reveal a man and 2 women. The man was short, shriveled, thin, and had a young, black-pocked face. The women were well-endowed, gorgeous, and wearing a sleeveless short skirt. However, they were enveloped with a dark, cold, evil aura. The 2 women were only late Foundation establishment cultivators. Han Li was unable to see through the grotesque, shriveled youth's cultivation, and he was sure to be a core formation cultivator. Elder Miao clearly recognized this man, and in his rage he spoke near incoherently. Wu Chuan. Chinese letter Chu can mean ugly as he is described, also describes certain QI thieves. What are you doing? Could it be you wish to go to war with our 6 united palaces? The shriveled youth spoke with great arrogance. War. This young master has no such interest. But as my clan's ancestor is leaving seclusion from the ocean's depth, this infant carp beast's demon core will be my congratulatory gift to him. Grandmaster Zenith Yin is leaving seclusion. The youth's words greatly frightened the 6 united palaces, and they looked at each other in dismay. When the other nearby cultivators heard this, their faces became deathly pale. Even the rather haughty middle-aged Confucian scholar trembled in terror. When Han Li saw this, he felt amazed. This Grandmaster Zenith Yin actually had such a large reputation. But what he was most curious about was the faint feeling of familiarity towards the youth's evil aura. After a moment of thought, Han Li felt that the divine bloodlight that the Emperor of Yue and Crooked Soul cultivated felt rather similar to the shriveled youth's, although theirs are much weaker. He couldn't help but think of the profound Yin scripture that was mentioned in the gray Jade slip. Han Li mused, could it have some relation to this profound Yin devil qi? Before Han Li could ponder any further, Elder Miao loudly reproached, "Wu Chu, you talk big. Did that matter of life and death seclusion 100 years ago allow him to make a huge breakthrough? Don't tell me that your ancestor became mid-nascent soul stage during that time." When Wu Chu heard this, he howled with laughter. Your 6 united palaces are truly ignorant. Who told you that my clan's ancestor entered cultivation to reach mid-nascent soul stage? My ancestor entered seclusion to cultivate a peerless devil art. He only left seclusion because he had reached the great success stage in the technique, Wu Chu stated proudly. Elder Miao and Gu appeared stupefied, not knowing whether he was speaking truth or lies. Since you now know of my clan ancestor's fame, this young master will be taking the infant carp beast. Surely there is no way that your 6 united palaces won't give our Zenith Yin Island face, Wu Chu sinisterly said as he gazed at their expressions. Upon hearing his infuriating words, Elder Miao's face paled, and Elder Gu's eyes flickered when he thought of something, but the both of them remained silent. As for the others, they couldn't help but take a few steps back, not wishing to become mixed up in this mess. When Feng Sanyang saw this, she frowned helplessly. Everyone here had been invited to deal with a demon beast. They weren't subordinates of the 6 united palaces. Under this current situation, the 6 united palaces truly found themselves at a disadvantage. Although the 6 united palaces initially had 2 core formation cultivators, their origin chi had been greatly damaged by activating the ancient rare treasures, the opposing heaven spears. The youth, Wu Chu, was also an early core formation cultivator, but he cultivated the finest devil art in the scattered star seas, the profound yin art. He was far above common core formation cultivators. Moreover, he had the backing of Grandmaster Zenith Yin, an evil devil lord known to all of the scattered star seas that nobody dared to lightly provoke. But to have Wu Chu to take away the infant carp beast before their eyes was a huge loss of face for the 6 united palaces. Not only would the entirety of their efforts be in vain, but they would also appear weak and easily bullied, stifling the future growth of the 6 united palaces. At this moment, Elder Gu and Elder Miao started to have a silent discussion, and their expressions continuously alternated between clear and gloomy. Wu Chu coldly snorted and arrogantly walked to the side of the infant carp beast. His hand flashed with black radiance, and a pitch-black devilish saber appeared in his hand. After chopping the demon beast's strange head open with his saber, he searched through the head for the demon core without any restraint. As for the 2 women, they vigilantly watched Elder Miao and Gu in the sky. Feng Sanyang's face became extremely unsightly, but since Elder Miao and Gu still hadn't said anything, she didn't dare to act. Han Li and the others silently gazed on, not daring to say a word. They were fearful of inviting disaster upon themselves. Not longer after, Wu Chu fished out a jade-blue sphere from the demon beast's head with his face full of delight. But his gaze then turned to the 4 wondrous items that were held in the demon beast's limbs, and he wore an expression of avarice. Just as he lifted his devilish saber, Elder Gu stopped him, speaking with a deep voice. "Young Island Lord, your ancestor could be said to have a relationship of old friendship with our palaces. You can take the infant carp beast's other items. However, our 6 united palaces requires the demon core. We must take it back or else we will not return." Elder Gu spoke with an indifferent tone, showing not the slightest emotion. When Wu Chu heard this, he coldly laughed and continued to chop down, ignoring his words. Breaking the demon beast's grasp, he tightly gripped the blue coral in his hands. Having seen this, Elder Gu revealed a softer expression and sighed, helplessly transmitting his voice towards Wu Chu. Upon hearing him, Wu Chu suddenly halted his saber and revealed an expression of astonishment. He lowered the devilish saber in his hands and opened and closed his mouth in disbelief as though he wanted to say something. Elder Gu then expressionlessly said a few additional words. This strange scene was completely baffling to Han Li and the others. As for Elder Miao, he expressionlessly floated in the air and turned a blind eye to what was happening. "I don't believe you. Give me evidence of your status." Wu Chu suddenly shook his head and coldly shouted. It's unclear whether or not it was deliberate, but he suddenly shouted this out without using a voice transfer technique. When Han Li and the others heard this, they couldn't help but feel puzzled. After giving each other a mutual glance, Elder Gu and Miao revealed a furious expression. "Fine, here is proof of our status." With an ice-cold expression, he waved his arm and released a black light. Wu Chu caught it without any effort. Han Li attentively gazed at this with a thumping heart, but he was only able to clearly see the item by relying on his powerful spiritual sense. It was a command medallion carved and painted in the shape of a malevolent ghost head that released a faint black chi. After carefully examining it, Wu Chu seemed to recognize it. Han Li's heart thumped, and he faintly felt a foreboding premonition. He hastily turned his head around, but what he saw left him fearful. The others appeared bewildered and were glancing at the actions of the three-core formation cultivators. However, Qing Suenzi's face appeared deathly white, and he started to fall back with tightened fists in complete silence. In the blink of an eye, he was already 100 meters away. When he saw Han Li looking at him, he was initially startled before revealing an unsightly, bitter smile. Afterwards, he wordlessly transformed into an azure streak, fleeing away at the greatest speed he could muster. This sight caused Han Li's heart to sink. He instantly reacted, patting his storage pouch and hastily withdrawing his divine wind boat. After dragging Crooked Soul onto the magic tool, he soon turned into a streak of white light and hastily fled in the direction of the small, unnamed island. Qing Suenzi's and Han Li's strange actions left Feng Sanyang and the other cultivators stunned, feeling great bafflement. When Elder Gu and Miao saw this, they revealed cold expressions. Elder Gu then sinisterly said, "We will take responsibility to kill the two that fled. Elder Brother Wu, I will leave the rest to you." Without waiting for Wu Chu's response, Elder Gu and Miao turned into two streaks of light, disappearing without a trace in the direction of Han Li and Qing Suenzi. Wu Chu coldly snorted. Although he appeared unwilling, he gazed at the bewildered Foundation establishment cultivators with killing intent. "Humph, you all sure aren't lucky, having witnessed something you shouldn't have. Now this young master will be taking your souls." Wu Chu spread open his arms and covered the nearby sky and earth with a black, evil wind in an instant, the astonishingly dense pressure instantly engulfing Feng Sanyang and the others. Chapter 383, Fighting Against Core Formation. Propelled by Han Li's late Foundation establishment cultivation, the already fast divine wind boat was like an arrow loosed from a bow, piercing through the very air itself. When Han Li saw that the reef was a short distance away, he inwardly sighed in relief. But when he turned his head to wipe away his sweat, he felt his blood run cold and heard something coming from behind him. During his shock, Han Li instantly reacted, stamping down on his divine wind boat and causing it to strafe to the side. An instant later, the divine wind boat was already about 40 meters away. At nearly the same time, a deep yellow streak of light passed through the location where Han Li had just been. About 100 meters away, the yellow light stopped, fading away to reveal a silhouette. Han Li wiped away his sticky, cold sweat and looked at this person with a bitter smile. The person before him had long, messy hair. He was the Six United Palace's Elder Gu. At that moment, Elder Gu stamped his foot onto an earth-yellow disc magic treasure and silently glanced at him with a gaze beyond cold as if Han Li were already a dead man in his eyes. As for the formation that Han Li had placed down, it was 40 meters behind him, much to Han Li's shock. However, Han Li clearly understood that any questions or pleas of mercy now would be in vain. He could only risk his life against this core formation, Senior, and see whether or not there would be an opportunity to use the formation spell to trap him. With that thought, Han Li's heart became resolute and he gave orders to Crooked Soul. Crooked Soul blurred and moved to block Han Li's front. At the same moment, his body released a faint blood-red light along with the scent of blood. As for Han Li, his hands shined with light, revealing two magic tools in his grasp. Seeing that Han Li and Crooked Soul wished to stubbornly resist, Elder Gu's eyes shined with an ominous glint before causing the disc magic treasure beneath him to release a long cry. The disc then shined with yellow radiance and enveloped his entire body in yellow light like an armor. Afterwards, Elder Gu suddenly raised his arms, silently shooting out a swarm of palm-sized blades of crescent light towards Han Li and Crooked Soul. While Han Li felt greatly alarmed, he also felt relief. His magic treasure was only as fast as the attacks of Lei Wan that Han Li had previously witnessed, giving Han Li the opportunity to save his own life. Han Li's consciousness surged, and he raised his hands. With one hand, he threw out a huge, enlarged tortoise shell. In the other, he held a sparkling small mirror that directly spouted out a mist of azure light towards the incoming light blades. An unbroken succession of booms rang out. The front portion of the light blades slowed down under the effects of the azure light mist. But as soon as the rest of the blades entered the azure light shattered and fragmented into bits of starlight. Crack! At the same moment, the mirror in Han Li's hand cracked into two, becoming unusable. Han Li threw away the azure stasis mirror without the slightest lament and patted his storage pouch without moving his gaze, releasing 2 streaks of black light and 5 streaks of white light from his storage pouch. After the stakes made a half-revolution around him, they orderly flew out. This still wasn't enough for Han Li. Another 8 flashes of white light surrounded him, revealing 4 puppet soldiers to either side of him. They drew their bows, ready to take action. Then the swarm of light blades struck the tortoise shell. In the instant that they made contact, countless deep scars immediately appeared on the shell. After merely a few short moments, the tortoise shell released a wail and was cleaved into countless pieces by the swarm of light blades. With the time this bought, Han Li's 7 top-grade magic tools had arrived in front of Crooked Soul and continuously revolved around him, forming a black-white barrier of light streaks. Naturally, these top-grade magic tools were also incapable of withstanding the weakened light blade attacks. The black dragon claws and the 5 white flying blades twinkled as they revolved, merely becoming fireflies. Without anything to block the swarm of crescent light blades, they chopped towards Crooked Soul, who stood motionlessly in front of Han Li. H! Crooked Soul suddenly let out a world-shaking roar, shedding off the blood-red light that surrounded his body. In the blink of an eye, the light turned into a huge red flood dragon, charging forward with brandished claws and bared fangs. Just as the red light and the light blades collided, the puppet soldiers at Han Li's side released their light arrows for a timely addition to the flood dragon's attack, causing a momentary deadlock. Han Li was ecstatic at how the event had played out, but Elder Gu revealed astonishment. But soon after, the core formation cultivator snorted with disdain and raised his hands as a burst of yellow radiance flourished from behind him. When Han Li saw this, he grew alarmed, as he had spent most of his precious magic tools blocking the last wave of attacks. If his enemy were to unleash another wave of incisive attacks, he would surely meet his end. While Han Li was lost in fear, the sneering core formation cultivator's complexion suddenly changed. Perhaps due to heavenly intervention, his cheeks flushed with an abnormal shade of red before soon turning pale. Afterwards, the yellow light behind his body dimmed, and his trembling body doubled over from pain. Elder Gu suddenly felt furious alarm. He was well aware that this was caused by the rash use of his true origin despite not recovering from the earlier damage to his origin chi. However, he only needed to suppress his injuries for a moment more to easily get rid of Han Li. This turn of events left Han Li wild with joy. He instantly reacted, taking advantage of this opportunity by grabbing Crooked Soul and then flying down towards the nameless island at the speed of lightning, leaving behind the flood dragon and puppet soldiers as he was unable to retrieve them in time. Elder Gu was furious with embarrassment. If he truly allowed Han Li to escape from his hand, he would be made a fool of. Vexed, he could only allow his injuries to somewhat worsen. Gritting his teeth, he made use of his entire body's spiritual power and forcefully suppressed his injuries before he resolutely chased after Han Li as a streak of blinding yellow light. Flying at great speed, Han Li managed to travel 100 meters in an instant. Just as he stepped into the perimeter of the spell formation, the yellow streak of light chased after him, nearly entering the formation at the same time. Just as Elder Gu smirked while thinking he would be able to kill the two in one blow, his eyes suddenly flashed with light, and he saw a huge change of scenery. The nameless island was nowhere to be seen, and he found himself above a huge jade sea with an immense pressure holding him in place. Formation spell. Elder Gu's expression grew solemn. Although he was somewhat shocked as to why there was a formation spell here, he didn't feel any panic. After all, the nearby fluctuations of the formation spell indicated it wasn't some impressive grand formation. He was confident he'd be able to break through it with ease. With that thought, Elder Gu's expression grew cold, and his body shone with dazzling yellow light. Naturally, what Han Li saw in his Jade Water Azure armor formation was completely different than what his core formation, Senior, saw. After flashing forward a few times on his divine wind boat, he easily left the great formation. With thoughts of fleeing to as far away as possible, Han Li turned his head towards the formation. Han Li's expression became gloomy. He saw Elder Gu transform into a yellow bolt of lightning, wildly striking against the formation spell's restrictions. As Han Li saw that he was about to break through, Han Li's expression continuously alternated between clear and gloomy. If Han Li were to flee, his pursuer would escape and give chase once more. Given the great discrepancy in speed between his pursuer's magic treasure and his divine wind boat, he'd definitely be chased down. As Han Li hesitated, several layers of the formation spell's restrictions were broken through. Having then come to decision, Han Li's eyes flashed with killing intent. He called out to Crooked Soul without hesitation and stealthily approached Elder Gu under the cover of the spell formation. But as they were approaching Elder Gu, their target seemed to sense something as he was unbridledly breaking through the spell formation. Elder Gu suddenly stopped and vigilantly looked around with a stern expression. Han Li wrinkled his brow. A small azure flag then appeared into his hand with a flash of light, the formation's master control flag. After whispering an indiscernible incantation, Han Li suddenly tossed the flag. The flag turned into a streak of azure light, merging with the formation. Afterwards, the scene before Elder Gu's eyes changed once more. He was now surrounded by a surging storm, and the original 600 kilograms of pressure suppressing him suddenly multiplied, causing his body to feel sluggish. While the core formation cultivator's body was slowed by the formation, a dozen translucent white ice spears shot out of the seawater behind him. Suddenly, Elder Gu's sluggish body became nimble once more. He managed to turn around and raise his hand, shooting out a huge yellow crescent. In the blink of an eye, he completely smashed the ice spears, but without the slightest delay, an ice snake shot out from another direction to strike him. Simultaneously, the seawater behind Elder Gu parted to reveal a blood-red beam of light. As the light beam was shot from a close range and traveled too quickly, Elder Gu was unable to dodge in time while under the formation spell's restrictions. He could only grimace and envelope his body with yellow radiance in an attempt to block the attacks. The arm-thick, blood-red light beam struck, causing Elder Gu to stumble forward and somewhat lose his balance. At the same time, there was a flash of azure light from his side, suddenly revealing Han Li fiercely chopping down with a huge azure sword in his hands. Elder Gu was greatly alarmed. There was clearly no one there before. What movement technique could be this strange? Although he felt astonished, he instantly reacted, causing his body's yellow light to suddenly surge in order to block Han Li's huge sword. Han Li chuckled and disappeared from sight. Then, Elder Gu heard sounds of breaking wind around him and saw over 10 red threads stabbing towards him. Flying needles. Elder Gu was aghast. He naturally knew much of these hidden weapons famed among the cultivation world. His body's yellow light brightly shined as if attempting to destroy the insidious magic tools, unwittingly falling into Han Li's trap. Bang! Han Li had reappeared behind him and swung down, causing the yellow radiance to sway. The dozen red threads then bizarrely drilled into his yellow radiance like snakes. In a single second, they pierced through a meter and still continued to fiercely bore deeper. With furious alarm, Elder Gu's eyes coldly glinted, and he reached for his storage pouch. He realized that, with their spell formation and strange attacks along with the great damage to his origin chi he previously suffered, it would be difficult to prevail. But without waiting for him to take something out, 2 thumb-thick streaks of blood-red light appeared in front of him, shooting towards his body with extreme incisiveness. Having suffered Han Li's attack and being trapped by the flying needles, the yellow radiance of his body had greatly weakened, allowing the unremarkable streaks of blood-red light to pierce through his yellow radiance. Elder Gu's face grew deathly pale, but as a core formation cultivator, feeling dread as he felt the blood-red streak pierce through his yellow radiance, and being unable to take out any of his treasures, he suddenly exerted the entirety of his body's strength to dodge. An instant later, both of the blood-red streaks of light struck. One of the streaks brushed past his ear, taking away a majority of its flesh. As for the other, although it missed any of his vital regions, it left a small hole with blood spurting whole out of his shoulder. Elder Gu then shouted in pain as his knees buckled. That wasn't the last of Han Li's attacks. Crooked Soul's lofty figure appeared from the sea a second later and raised his arms, shooting out 2 blood-red light beams. At the same moment, Han Li expressionlessly held a silver sword with a single hand and waved it in arcs of silver light, continuously striking the yellow radiance. Ear-piercing screeches echoed upon each slash. With his other hand, he took out a thick stack of talismans, releasing a barrage of countless fireballs and ice spears. In the following moments, flashes of blinding radiance and sounds of explosions continued without end. Slowly recovering his consciousness from the pain, Elder Gu panicked. He clearly felt that due to the formation spell's pressure, his enemy's ceaseless attacks, and his lack of magic power from the use of his immemorial bowl, the yellow radiance protecting his body would not last. Without any regard for the consequences, he used a secret technique to forcefully withdraw magic power. But before this was completed, Han Li's incantation produced an ice-cold sound. Suddenly, the chaotic seawaters surrounding Elder Gu began to swirl, momentarily increasing the huge pressure affecting his body by several-fold. As the yellow light protecting his body was brought to its final glimmers, it released a mournful groan under Elder Gu's incredulous gaze before it finally disappeared without a trace. With nothing left to obstruct the flying needles, they immediately pierced through his vitals in a flash of red light, bringing Elder Gu to his knees. A silver light flashed to reveal Han Li silently appearing at his side, and the six united palaces Elder Gu's fine head then landed over 10 meters away. Immediately after, a fountain of blood shot out from the headless corpse, densely filling the air with the scent of blood. Han Li let out a long breath, but quickly stepped forward to the side of the corpse to snatch its storage pouch. At the same time, Crooked Soul reached out to collect the yellow bowl magic treasure. With that, Han Li and Crooked Soul quickly fled away out of the formation in the Divine Wind boat. After flying for only 15 meters, Han Li plunged the boat into the ocean and submerged himself about 100 meters down. Afterwards, he put away his Divine Wind boat and took out ore-severing red muslin cloth, wrapping it around Crooked Soul and himself. They then used the nameless incantation to restrain their chi. Not long after this was done, a formidable and wrathful spiritual sense arrived nearby, searching from up above the nearby sea. Although the spiritual sense made a fine examination, its owner was unable to find any trace of Han Li or Crooked Soul. After furiously sweeping his spiritual sense through the nearby area once more, he hurriedly rushed away to another area. After this, Han Li finally felt truly at ease. Naturally, he wouldn't foolishly make a sudden emergence from the sea. Instead, he released a blue light barrier to separate him and Crooked Soul from the ocean and had Crooked Soul enter meditation. The concealment within the ocean lasted for over half a month. During those days, the owner of the huge spiritual sense was unwilling to give up and repeatedly searched the nearby seas several times. But as Han Li had always noticed him coming and had restrained his chi beforehand, he was never successful. Now that the spiritual sense hadn't appeared for several days, Han Li finally dared to move. After slowly traveling over 50 kilometers away, he finally flew out of the seawater, got his bearings, and flew off at his greatest speed. Naturally, he couldn't return to Stalwart Star Island, and would have to find somewhere else to stay. Although he didn't know what sort of shameful relationship the six united palaces Elder Gu and Elder Miao had with the youth named Wu Chu, they would be certain to kill and silence him. But since a foundation establishment cultivator such as himself couldn't compare to the remaining two core formation cultivators, it would be better to travel far away from the scope of their influence. It was truly unfortunate to lose his 3 magic formation tool sets and his Immortals cave at Minor Expanse Island. With the addition of the lost magic tools during his fight with Elder Gu, Han Li had suffered a truly great loss. As Han Li flew as fast as he could, he laughed at himself with a bitter smile. But when compared to the disastrous fates of the other Foundation establishment cultivators, he couldn't complain. He managed to preserve his own life. While Han Li was consoling himself, his heart suddenly stirred and he took out Elder Gu's storage pouch. During the previous period under the ocean, Han Li had been apprehensive and hadn't examined the storage pouch as a result. Now was the time to take a look. Surely a core formation cultivator couldn't be too poor. With some luck, he might even be able to more than recoup his losses. After slowly sinking his spiritual sense into the storage pouch, Han Li found 80 mid-grade spirit stones and grew mad with joy. This Elder Gu was truly quite wealthy. He actually carried such a great amount of spirit stones. Could it be that Elder Gu was like himself and carried all of his belongings on his person? If this were the case, this would be an ordinary amount of spirit stones for a core formation cultivator. With that in mind, Han Li shifted his attention away from the spirit stones to the other items in the pouch. There was a yellow, inch-tall jade bottle, 2 talismans respectively sparkling with yellow and blue light, a book, and an orb sparkling with blue radiance. As for the rest of the items, they were of little value. The book wasn't anything special. It was a high-layer cultivation art, earthfare technique. Although it couldn't be said to be common, it was something that he definitely wouldn't cultivate. Much to Han Li's joy, the 2 talismans turned out to be treasure talismans, despite him not knowing their names. One of them had a small golden sword drawn on it, and the other had a blue flood dragon. Han Li then took out the sphere and played around with it for a moment. Eventually, he became certain that it was the core of a grade 5 demon beast, a very precious item. Lastly, there was the small, unremarkable bottle. When Han Li opened the small yellow bottle, he spotted 5 thumb-sized yellow pills. These pills were identical to one another, brightly colored, perfectly shaped, and had a fantastic medicinal scent. Dustfall pills. Han Li stared at the pills in his hand in complete astonishment. Although he hadn't seen this item before, the pills perfectly matched the description found in the Pill Dao evaluations. What else could they possibly be? Chapter 384, Beheading the Superior.